Publisher's Preface. Elbert Hubbard is dead, or should we say has gone on his last little journey to the great beyond, but the children of his fertile brain still live and will continue to live and keep fresh the memory of their illustrious forebear. 14 years were consumed in the preparation of the work that ranks today as Elbert Hubbard's masterpiece. In 1894, the series of little journeys to the homes of the great was begun, and once a month for 14 years, without a break, one of these little pilgrimages was given to the world. These little gems have been accepted as classics and will live. In all, there are 180 little journeys that take us to the homes of the men and women who transformed the thought of their time, changed the course of empire, and marked the destiny of civilization. Through him, the ideas, the deeds, the achievements of these immortals have been given to the living present and will be sent echoing down the centuries. Hubbard's little journeys to the homes of these men and women have not been equaled since Plutarch wrote his 46 parallel lives of the Greeks and Romans. And these were given to the world before the first rosy dawn of modern civilization had risen to the horizon. Without dwelling upon their achievements, Plutarch, with a trifling incident, a simple word or an innocent jest, showed the virtues and failings of his subject. As a result, no other books from classical literature have come down through the ages to us with so great an influence upon the lives of the leading men of the world. Who can recount the innumerable biographies that begin thus? In his youth, our subject had for his constant reading Plutarch's Lives, etc. Emerson must have had in mind this silent, irresistible force that shaped the lives of the great men of these 20 centuries when he declared, "All history resolves itself very easily into the biography of a few stout and earnest persons." Plutarch lived in the time of St. Paul and wrote of the early Greeks and Romans. After 2,000 years, Hubbard appeared to bridge the centuries from Athens in the golden age of Pericles to America in the wondrous age of Edison. With the magic wand of genius, he touched the buried mummies of all time, and from each tomb gushed forth a geyser of inspiration. Hugh Chalmers once remarked that if he were getting out a Blue Book of America, he would publish Elbert Hubbard's subscription lists. Whether we accept this authoritative statement or not, there is no doubt that the pen of this immortal did more to stimulate the best minds of the country than any other American writer, living or dead. Eminent writers study Hubbard for style, while at the same time thousands of the tired men and women who do the world's work read him for inspiration. Truly, this man wielded his pen like an archangel. Not only as a writer does this many-sided genius command our admiration, but in many chosen fields, in all of which he excelled. As an institution, the Roycroft shops would reflect credit upon the business acumen of the ablest men that America has produced in the field of achievement. The industry, it would seem, was launched to demonstrate the practicality of the high principles and philosophy preached by its founder, not only by the printed page, but from the platform. Right here, let it be noted that as a public speaker, Hubbard appeared before more audiences than any other lecturer of his time who gave the platform his undivided attention. Where, one asks in amazement, did this remarkable man find the inspiration for carrying forward his great work? It is no secret. It was drawn from his own little pilgrimages to the haunts of the great. Again, like Plutarch, these miniature biographies were composed for the personal benefit of the writer. It was his own satisfaction and moral improvement that inspired the work. Following Hubbard's tragic death, the announcement was made from East Aurora that the Philistine magazine would be discontinued. Hubbard had gone on a long journey and might need his Philistine. Besides, who was there to take up his pen? It was also a beautiful tribute to the father from the son. The same spirit of devotion has prompted the Roycrofters to issue their memorial edition of the Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great. In no other way could they so fittingly perpetuate the memory of the founder of their institution as to liberate the influence that was such an important factor in molding the career of his genius. If he should cast a backward glance, he would nod his approval. If there is to be a memorial, certainly let it be a service to mankind. He would have us all tap the same source from which he drew his inspiration. autobiographical. The mintage of wisdom is to know that rest is rust, and that real life is in love, laughter, and work. Elbert Hubbard. I have been asked to write an article about myself and the work in which I am engaged. I think I'm honest enough to sink self, to stand outside my own personality, and answer the proposition. Let me begin by telling what I am not, and thus reach the vital issue by elimination. First, I'm not popular in society, and those who champion my cause in my own town are plain, unpretentious people. Second, I am not a popular writer, since my name has never been mentioned in the Atlantic, Scribner's, Harper's, The Century, or the Ladies' Home Journal. But as a matter of truth, it may not be amiss for me to say that I have waited long hours in the entryway of each of the magazines just named, in days agone, and then been handed the frappé. Third, I am not rich, as the world counts wealth. Fourth, as an orator, I am without the graces and do scant justice to the double-breasted Prince Albert. Fifth, the Roycroft shop, to the welfare of which my life is dedicated, is not so large as to be conspicuous on account of size. Sixth, personally, I am no $10,000 beauty. The glass of fashion and the mold of form are far from mine. Then what have I done concerning which the public wishes to know? Simply this. In one obscure country village, I have had something to do with stopping the mad desire on the part of the young people to get out of the country and flock to the cities. In this town and vicinity, the tide has been turned from city to country. We have made one country village an attractive place for growing youth by supplying congenial employment, opportunity for education and healthful recreation, and an outlook into the world of art and beauty. All boys and girls want to make things with their hands, and they want to make beautiful things. They want to get along. And I've simply given them a chance to get along here instead of seeking their fortunes in Buffalo, New York, or Chicago. They have helped me, and I have helped them. And through this mutual help, we have made head, gained ground upon the whole. By myself, I could have done nothing, and if I have succeeded, it is simply because I have had the aid and cooperation of cheerful, willing, loyal, and loving helpers. Even now, as I am writing this in my cabin in the woods, 4 miles from the village, they are down there at the shop, quietly, patiently, cheerfully doing my work, which work is also theirs. No man liveth unto himself alone. Our interests are all bound up together, and there is no such thing as a man going off by himself and corralling the good. When I came to this town, there was not a house in the place that had a lavatory with hot and cold water attachments. Those who bathed swam in the creek in the summer or used the family wash tub in the kitchen in winter. My good old partner, Ali Baba, has always prided himself on his personal cleanliness. He is arrayed in rags, but underneath his hide is clean, and better still, his heart is right. Yet when he first became a member of my household, he was obliged to take his Saturday night tub out in the orchard, from spring until autumn came with withered leaves. He used to make quite an ado in the kitchen, heating the water in the wash boiler. 6 pails of cistern water, a gourd of soft soap, and a gunny sack for friction were required in the operation. Of course, the Baba waited until after dark before performing his ablutions, but finally his plans were more or less disturbed by certain rising youth, who timed his habits and awaited his disrobing with Orip tomatoes. The bombardment and the inability to pursue the enemy turned the genial current of the Baba's life awry until I put a bathroom in my house with a lock on the door. This bit of history I have mentioned for the dual purpose of shedding light on former bathing facilities in East Aurora, and more especially to show that once we had the hoodlum with us. Hoodlumism is born of idleness. It is useful energy gone to seed. In small towns, hoodlumism is rife, and the hoodlums are usually the children of the best citizens. Hoodlumism is the first step in the direction of crime. The hoodlum is very often a good boy who does not know what to do, and so he does the wrong thing. He bombards with tomatoes a good man taking a bath, puts tic-tacs on windows, ties a tin can to the dog's tail, takes the burrs off your carriage wheels, steals your chickens, annexes your horse blankets, and scares old ladies into fits by appearing at windows wrapped in a white sheet. To wear a mask Walk in and demand the money in the family ginger jar is the next and natural evolution. To a great degree, the Roycroft shop has done away with hoodlumism in this village, and a stranger wearing a silk hat or an artist with a white umbrella is now quite safe upon our streets. Very naturally, the oldest inhabitant will deny what I have said about East Aurora. He will tell you that the order, cleanliness, and beauty of the place have always existed. The change has come about so naturally and so entirely without his assistance that he knows nothing about it. Truth, when first presented, is always denied, but later there comes a stage when the man says, "I always believed it." And so the good old citizens are induced to say that these things have always been, or else they gently pooh-pooh them. However, the truth remains that I introduced the first heating furnace into the town, bought the first lawnmower, was among the first to use electricity for lights and natural gas for fuel, and so far am the only one in town to use natural gas for power. Until the starting of the Roycroft shop, there were no industries here, aside from the regulation country store, grocery, tavern, blacksmith shop and sawmill, none of which enterprises attempted to supply more than local wants. There was Hamlin's stock farm devoted to raising trotting horses that gave employment to some of the boys, but for the girls there was nothing. They got married at the first chance. Some became hired girls, or, if they had ambitions, fixed their hearts on the Buffalo Normal School, raised turkeys, picked berries, and turned every honest penny towards the desire to get an education so as to become teachers. Comparatively, this class was small in number. Most of the others simply followed that undefined desire to get away out of the dull, monotonous, gossiping village. And so, craving excitement, they went away to the cities, and the cities swallowed them. A wise man has said that God made the country, man the city, and the devil the small towns. The country supplies the city its best and its worst. We hear of the few who succeed, but of the many who are lost in the maelstrom we know nothing. Sometimes in country homes it is even forbidden to mention certain names. She went to the city, you are told, and there the history abruptly stops. And so, to swing back to the place of beginning, I think the chief reason many good folks are interested in the Roycroft shop is because here country boys and girls are given work at which they not only earn their living, but can get an education while doing it. Next to this is the natural curiosity to know how a large and successful business can be built up in a plain, humdrum village by simply using the talent and materials that are at hand, and so I am going to tell now how the Roycroft shop came to start. A little about what it has done, what it is trying to do, and what it hopes to become. And since modesty is only egotism turned wrong side out, I will make no special endeavor to conceal the fact that I've had something to do with the venture. In London, from about 1650 to 1690, Samuel and Thomas Roycroft printed and made very beautiful books. In choosing the name Roycroft for our shop, we had these men in mind, but beyond this, the word has a special significance, meaning king's craft. King's craftsman being a term used in the guilds of the olden times for men who had achieved a high degree of skill, men who made things for the king. So a Roycrofter is a person who makes beautiful things, and makes them as well as he can. The Roycrofters is the legal name of our institution. It is a corporation, and the shares are distributed among the workers. No shares are held by anyone but Roycrofters, and it is agreed that any worker who quits the shop shall sell his shares back to the concern. This cooperative plan, it has been found, begets a high degree of personal diligence, a loyalty to the institution, a sentiment of fraternity, and a feeling of permanency among the workers that is very beneficial to all concerned. Each worker, even the most humble, calls it our shop, and feels that he is an integral and necessary part of the whole. Possibly there are a few who consider themselves more than necessary. Ali Baba, for instance, it is said, has referred to himself at times as the whole thing. And this is all right too. I would never chide an excess of zeal. The pride of a worker in his worth and work is a thing to foster. It's the man who doesn't give a damn who is really troublesome. The artistic bighead is not half so bad as apathy. In the month of December 1894, I printed the first little journeys in booklet form at the local printing office, having become discouraged in trying to find a publisher. But before offering the publication to the public, I decided to lay the matter again before G.P. Putnam's sons, although they had declined the matter in manuscript form. Mr. George H. Putnam rather liked the matter and was induced to issue the periodical as a venture for 1 year. The scheme seemed to meet with success, the novel form of the publication being in its favor. The subscription reached nearly 1,000 in 6 months. The newspapers were kind, and the success of the plan suggested printing a pamphlet modeled on similar lines, telling what we thought about things in general, and publishers and magazine editors in particular. There was no intention at first of issuing more than one number of this pamphlet, but to get it through the mails at magazine rates, we made up a little subscription list and asked that it be entered at the post office at East Aurora as second-class matter. The postmaster adjusted his brass-rimmed spectacles, read the pamphlet, and decided that it surely was second-class matter. We called it the Philistine because we were going after the chosen people in literature. It was Leslie Stephen who said, "The term Philistine is a word used by prigs to designate people they do not like. When you call a man a bad name, you are that thing, not he." The smug and snugly ensconced denizens of Union Square called me a Philistine, and I said, "Yes, I am one, if a Philistine is something different from you." My helpers, the printers, were about to go away to pastures new. They were in debt, the town was small, they could not make a living. So they offered me their outfit for $1,000. I accepted the proposition. I decided to run the Philistine magazine for a year, to keep faith with the misguided and hopeful parties who had subscribed, and then quit. To fill in the time, we printed a book. We printed it like a William Morris book, printed it just as well as we could. It was cold in the old barn where we first set up the Philistine, so I built a little building like an old English chapel right alongside of my house. There was one basement and a room upstairs. I wanted it to be comfortable and pretty, and so we furnished our little shop cozily. We had 4 girls and 3 boys working for us then. The shop was never locked, and the boys and girls used to come around evenings. It was really more pleasant than at home. I brought over a shelf of books from the library. Then I brought the piano because the youngsters wanted to dance. The girls brought flowers and birds, and the boys put up curtains at the windows. We were having a lot of fun with new subscriptions coming in almost every day, and once in a while an order for a book. The place got too small when we began to bind books, so we built a wing on one side, then a wing on the other side. To keep the 3 carpenters busy who had been building the wings, I set them to making furniture for the place. They made the furniture as good as they could. Folks came along and bought it. The boys picked up field stones and built a great splendid fireplace and chimney at one end of the shop. The work came out so well that I said, "Boys, here is a great scheme. These hardheads are splendid building material." So I advertised we would pay $1 a load for niggerheads. The farmers began to haul stones. They hauled more stones, and at last they had hauled 4,000 loads. We bought all the stone in the dollar limit, bulling the market on boulders. 3 stone buildings have been built, another is in progress, and our plans are made to build an art gallery of the same material. The stones that the builders rejected. An artist blew in on the way to nowhere, his baggage a tomato can. He thought he would stop over for a day or 2. He is with us yet, and 3 years have gone by since he came, and now we could not do without him. Then we have a few remittance men sent to us from a distance without return tickets. Some of these men were willing to do anything but work. They offered to run things, to preach, to advise, to make love to the girls. We bought them tickets to Chicago and without violence conducted them to the 4 o'clock train. We have boys who have been expelled from school, blind people, deaf people, old people, jailbirds, and mental defectives, and have managed to set them all at useful work. But the remittance man of good family who smokes cigarettes in bed has proved too much for us. So we have given him the 4 o'clock without Ruth. We do not encourage people from a distance who want work to come on. They are apt to expect too much. They look for utopia when work is work, here as elsewhere. There is just as much need for patience, gentleness, loyalty, and love here as anywhere. Application, desire to do the right thing, a willingness to help, and a well-curbed tongue are as necessary in East Aurora as in Tuskegee. We do our work as well as we can, live one day at a time, and try to be kind. The village of East Aurora, Erie County, New York, the home of the Roycrofters, is 18 miles southeast of the city of Buffalo. The place has a population of about 3,000 people. There is no wealth in the town and no poverty. In East Aurora, there are 6 churches with pastors' salaries varying from $300 to $1,000 a year, and we have a most excellent school. The place is not especially picturesque or attractive, being simply a representative New York State village. Lake Erie is 10 miles distant, and Cazenovia Creek winds its lazy way along by the village. The land around East Aurora is poor, and so reduced in purse are the farmers that no insurance company will insure farm property in Erie County under any conditions unless the farmer has some business outside of agriculture. The experience of the underwriters being that when a man is poor enough, he is also dishonest. Insure a farmer's barn in New York State, and there is a strong probability that he will soon invest in kerosene. However, there is no real destitution, for a farmer can always raise enough produce to feed his family, and in a wooded country he can get fuel, even if he has to lift it between the dawn and the day. Most of the workers in the Roycroft shop are children of farming folk, and it is needless to add that they are not college-bred, nor have they had the advantages of foreign travel. One of our best helpers, Uncle Billy Bushnell, has never been to Niagara Falls and does not care to go. Uncle Billy says if you stay at home and do your work well enough, the world will come to you, which aphorism the old man backs up with another, probably derived from experience, to the effect that a man is a fool to chase after women, because if he doesn't, the women will chase after him. The wisdom of this hard-headed old son of the soil, who abandoned agriculture for art at 70, is exemplified in the fact that during the year just past, over 28,000 pilgrims have visited the Roycroft shop, representing every state and territory of the Union and every civilized country on the globe, even far-off Iceland, New Zealand, and the Isle of Guam. 310 people are on the payroll at the present writing. The principal work is printing, illuminating, and binding books. We also have a furniture shop where mission furniture of the highest grade is made, a modelled leather shop where the most wonderful creations in calfskin are to be seen, and a smithy where copper utensils of great beauty are hammered out by hand. Quite as important as the printing and binding is the illuminating of initials and title pages. This is a revival of a lost art, gone with so much of the artistic work done by the monks of the olden time. Yet there is a demand for such work, and so far as I know, we are the first concern in America to take up the hand illumination of books as a business. Of course, we have had to train our helpers, and from very crude attempts at decoration, we have attained to a point where the British Museum and the Bibliothèque at The Hague have deigned to order and pay good golden guineas for specimens of our handicraft. Very naturally, we want to do the best work possible, and so self-interest prompts us to be on the lookout for budding genius. The Roycroft is a quest for talent. There is a market for the best, and the surest way we think to get away from competition is to do your work a little better than the other fellow. The old tendency to make things cheaper instead of better in the book line is a fallacy, as shown in the fact that within 10 years there have been a dozen failures of big publishing houses in the United States. The liabilities of these bankrupt concerns footed the fine total of $14 million. The man who made more books and cheaper books than any one concern ever made had the felicity to fail very shortly with liabilities of something over $1 million. He overdid the thing in matter of cheapness, mistook his market. Our motto is, not how cheap, but how good. This is the richest country the world has ever known, far richer per capita than England, lending money to Europe. Once Americans were all shoddy, pioneers have to be, I'm told, but now only a part of us are shoddy. As men and women increase in culture and refinement, they want fewer things, and they want better things. The cheap article, I will admit, ministers to a certain grade of intellect. But if the man grows, there will come a time when, Instead of a great many cheap and shoddy things, he will want a few good things. He will want things that symbol solidity, truth, genuineness, and beauty. The Roycrofters have many opportunities for improvement, not the least of which is the seeing, hearing, and meeting distinguished people. We have a public dining room, and not a day passes but men and women of note sit at meat with us. At the evening meal, if our visitors are so inclined and are of the right fibre, I ask them to talk. And if there is no one else to speak, I sometimes read a little from William Morris, Shakespeare, Walt Whitman, or Ruskin. David Bispham has sung for us. Maud Adams and Minnie Madden Fisk have also favoured us with a taste of their quality. Judge Lindsay, Alfred Henry Lewis, Richard Le Gallienne, Robert Barr have visited us. But to give a list of all the eminent men and women who have spoken, sung, or played for us would lay me liable for infringement in printing Who's Who. However, let me name one typical incident. The Boston Ideal Opera Company was playing in Buffalo, and Henry Clay Barnaby and half a dozen of his players took a run out to East Aurora. They were shown through the shop by one of the girls whose work it is to receive visitors. A young woman of the company sat down at one of the pianos and played. I chanced to be near and asked Mr. Barnaby if he would not sing, and graciously he answered, "Fra Albertus, I'll do anything that you say." I gave the signal that all the workers should quit their tasks and meet at the chapel. In 5 minutes we had an audience of 300, men in blouses and overalls, girls in big aprons, a very jolly, kindly, receptive company. Mr. Barnaby was at his best. I never saw him so funny. He sang, danced, recited, and told stories for 40 minutes. The Roycrofters were, of course, delighted. One girl whispered to me as she went out, "I wonder what great sorrow is gnawing at Barnaby's heart, that he is so wondrous gay." Need I say that the girl who made the remark just quoted had drunk of life's cup to the very lees? We have a few such with us, and several of them are among our most loyal helpers. One fortuitous event that has worked to our decided advantage was a message to Garcia. This article, not much more than a paragraph covering only 1,500 words, was written one evening after supper in a single hour. It was the 22nd of February, 1899, Washington's birthday, and we were just going to press with the March Philistine. The thing leaped hot from my heart, written after a rather trying day, when I had been endeavouring to train some rather delinquent helpers in the way they should go. The immediate suggestion, though, came from a little argument over the teacups, when my son Bert suggested that Rowan was the real hero of the Cuban War. Rowan had gone alone and done the thing. Carried the message to Garcia. It came to me like a flash. Yes, the boy is right. The hero is the man who does the thing, does his work, carries the message. I got up from the table and wrote, "A message to Garcia." And I thought so little of it that we ran it in without a heading. The edition went out, and soon orders began to come for extra March Philistines, a dozen, 50, 100. And when the American News Company ordered 1,000, I asked one of my helpers which article it was that had stirred things up. "It's that stuff about Garcia," he said. The next day a telegram came from George H. Daniels of the New York Central Railroad, thus: "Give price on 100,000 Rowan article in pamphlet form, Empire State Express advertisement on back, also state how soon can ship." I replied giving price and stated we could supply the pamphlets in 2 years. Our facilities were small, and 100,000 pamphlets looked like an awful undertaking. The result was that I gave Mr. Daniels permission to reprint the article in his own way. He issued it in booklet form in editions of 100,000 each. 5 editions were sent out, and then he got out an edition of 500,000. 2 or 3 of these 500,000 lots were sent out by Mr. Daniels, and in addition the article was reprinted in over 200 magazines and newspapers. It has been translated into 11 languages and been given a total circulation of over 22 million copies. It has attained, I believe, a larger circulation in the same length of time than any written article has ever before reached. Of course, we cannot tell just how much good A Message to Garcia has done the shop, but it probably doubled the circulation of The Philistine. I do not consider it by any means my best piece of writing, but it was opportune, The time was ripe. Truth demands a certain expression, and too much had been said on the other side about the downtrodden, honest man looking for work and not being able to find it. The article in question states the other side. Men are needed, loyal, honest men who will do their work. The world cries out for him, the man who can carry a message to Garcia. The man who sent the message and the man who received it are dead. The man who carried it is still carrying other messages. The combination of theme, condition of the country, and method of circulation was so favorable that their conjunction will probably never occur again. Other men will write better articles, but they may go a-begging for lack of a Daniels to bring them to judgment. Concerning my own personal history, I'll not tarry long to tell. It has been too much like the career of many another born in the semi-pioneer times of the Middle West to attract much attention, unless one should go into the psychology of the thing with intent to show the evolution of a soul. But that will require a book, and someday I'll write it after the manner of Saint Augustine or Jean-Jacques. But just now I'll only say that I was born in Illinois, June 19th, 1856. My father was a country doctor, whose income never exceeded $500 a year. I left school at 15 with a fair hold on the 3 R's, and beyond this, my education in manual training had been good. I knew all the forest trees, all wild animals thereabout, every kind of fish, frog, fowl, or bird that swam, ran, or flew. I knew every kind of grain or vegetable and its comparative value. I knew the different breeds of cattle, horses, sheep, and swine. I could teach wild cows to stand while being milked, break horses to saddle or harness, could sow, plow, and reap, knew the mysteries of apple butter, pumpkin pie pickled beef, smoked side meat, and could make lye at a leach and formulate soft soap. That is to say, I was a bright, strong, active country boy who had been brought up to help his father and mother get a living for a large family. I was not so densely ignorant. Don't feel sorry for country boys. God is often on their side. At 15, I worked on a farm and did a man's work for a boy's pay. I did not like it and told the man so. He replied, "You know what you can do." And I replied, "Yes." I went westward like the course of empire and became a cowboy. Tired of this and went to Chicago, worked in a printing office, peddled soap from house to house, shoved lumber on the docks, read all the books I could find, wrote letters back to country newspapers and became a reporter. Next, got a job as traveling salesman, taught in a district school, read Emerson, Carlyle, and Macaulay, worked in a soap factory, read Shakespeare, and committed most of Hamlet to memory with an eye on the stage. Became manager of the soap factory, then partner. Evolved an idea for the concern and put it on the track of making millions, knew it was going to make millions, did not want them. Sold out my interest for $75,000 and went to Harvard College. Tramped through Europe, wrote for sundry newspapers, penned 2 books, couldn't find a publisher, taught night school in Buffalo, tramped through Europe some more and met William Morris, caught it, came back to East Aurora and started Chautauqua circles, studied Greek and Latin with a local clergyman, raised trotting horses, wrote Little Journeys to the Homes of Good Men and Great. So that is how I got my education, such as it is. I am a graduate of the University of Hard Knocks, and I've taken several postgraduate courses. I have worked at 5 different trades enough to be familiar with the tools. In 1899, Tufts College bestowed on me the degree of Master of Arts. But since I did not earn the degree, it really does not count. I have never been sick a day, never lost a meal through disinclination to eat, never consulted a doctor, never used tobacco or intoxicants. My work has never been regulated by the 8-hour clause. Horses have been my only extravagance, and I ride horseback daily now. A horse that I broke myself, that has never been saddled by another, and that has never been harnessed. My best friends have been working men, homely women and children. My father and mother are members of my household, and they work in the shop when they are so inclined. My mother's business now is mostly to care for the flowers, and my father we call physician to the Roycrofters, as he gives free advice and attendance to all who desire his services. Needless to say, his medicine is mostly a matter of the mind. Unfortunately for him, we do not enjoy poor health, so there is very seldom anyone sick to be cured. Fresh air is free and outdoor exercise is not discouraged. The Roycroft shop and belongings represent an investment of about $300,000. We have no liabilities, making it a strict business policy to sign no notes or other instruments of debt that may in the future prove inopportune and tend to disturb digestion. Fortune has favored us. First, the country has grown tired of soft platitude, silly truism, and undisputed things said in such a solemn way. So when the Philistine stepped into the ring and voiced in no uncertain tones what its editor thought, thinking men and women stopped and listened. Editors of magazines refused my manuscript because they said it was too plain, too blunt, sometimes indelicate. It would give offense, subscribers would cancel, etc. To get my thoughts published, I had to publish them myself, and people bought for the very reason for which the editors said they would cancel. The readers wanted brevity and plain statement. The editors said they didn't. The editors were wrong. They failed to properly diagnose a demand. I saw the demand and supplied it, for a consideration. Next, I believed the American public. A portion of it, at least, wanted a few good and beautiful books, instead of a great many cheap books. The truth came to me in the early 90s when John B. Alden and half a dozen other publishers of cheap books went to the wall. I read the R.G. Dunn & Company bulletin and I said, the publishers have mistaken their public. We want better books, not cheaper. In 1892, I met William Morris, and after that, I was sure I was right. Again, I had gauged the public correctly. The publishers were wrong as the editors. There was a market for the best, and the problem was to supply it. At first, I bound my books in paper covers and simple boards. Men wrote to me wanting fine bindings. I said, there is a market in America for the best. Cheap boards covered with cloth, stamped by machinery in gaudy tinsel and gilt are not enough. I discovered that nearly all the bookbinders were dead. I found 500 people in a book factory in Chicago binding books, but not a bookbinder among them. They simply fed the books into hoppers and shot them out of chutes and said they were bound. Next, the public wanted to know about this thing. What are you folks doing out there in that buckwheat town? Since my 20th year, I have had one eye on the histrionic stage. I could talk in public a bit, had made political speeches, given entertainments in crossroads schoolhouses, made temperance harangues, was always called upon to introduce the speaker of the evening, and several times had given readings from my own amusing works for the modest stipend of $10 and keep. I would have taken the lecture platform had it not been nailed down. In 1898, my friend Major Pond wanted to book me on a partnership deal at the Waldorf Astoria. I didn't want to speak there. I had been saying unkind things in the Philistine about the Waldorf Astoria folks. But the Major went ahead and made arrangements. I expected to be mobbed. But Mr. Bolt, the manager of the hotel, had placed a suite of rooms at my disposal without money and without price. He treated me most cordially, never referred to the outrageous things I had said about his tavern, assured me that he enjoyed my writings, and told me of the pleasure he had in welcoming me. Thus did he heap hot cinders upon my occiput. The Astor Gallery seats 800 people. Major Pond had packed in 900 at $1 each. 300 were turned away. After the lecture, the Major awaited me in the anteroom, fell on my neck and rained Pond's extract down my back, crying, Oh, why didn't we charge them $2 apiece? The next move was to make a tour of the principal cities under Major Pond's management. Neither of us lost money. The Major surely did not. Last season, I gave 81 lectures with a net profit to myself of a little over $10,000. I spoke at Tremont Temple in Boston to 2,200 people, at Carnegie Hall, New York, at Central Music Hall, Chicago. I spoke to all the house would hold. At Chautauqua, my audience was 5,000 people. It will be noted by the discerning that my lectures have been of double importance in that they have given an income and at the same time advertised the Roycroft wares. The success of the Roycroft shop has not been brought about by any one scheme or plan. The business is really a combination of several ideas, any one of which would make a paying enterprise in itself. So it stands about thus. First, the printing and publication of 3 magazines. Second, the printing of books, it being well known that some of the largest publishers in America, Scribner and Appleton for instance, have no printing plants, but have the work done for them. Third, the publication of books. Fourth, the artistic binding of books. Fifth, authorship. Since I began printing my own manuscript, there is quite an eager demand for my writing, so I do a little of Class B for various publishers and editors. Sixth, the lecture lyceum. Seventh, blacksmithing, carpenter work and basket weaving. These industries have sprung up under the Roycroft care as a necessity. Men and women in the village came to us and wanted work, and we simply gave them opportunity to do the things they could do best. We have found a market for all our wares, so no line of work has ever been a bill of expense. I want no better clothing, no better food, no more comforts and conveniences than my helpers and fellow workers have. I would be ashamed to monopolize a luxury, to take a beautiful work of art, say a painting or a marble statue, and keep it for my own pleasure and for the select few I might invite to see my beautiful things. Art is for all, beauty is for all. Harmony in all of its manifold forms should be like a sunset, free to all who can drink it in. The Roycroft shop is for the Roycrofters, and each is limited only by his capacity to absorb. Art is the expression of man's joy in his work, and all the joy and love that you can weave into a fabric comes out again and belongs to the individual who has the soul to appreciate it. Art is beauty, and beauty is a gratification, a peace and a solace to every normal man and woman. Beautiful sounds, beautiful colors, beautiful proportions, beautiful thoughts, how our souls hunger for them. Matter is only mind in an opaque condition, and all beauty is but a symbol of spirit. You cannot get joy from feeding things all day into a machine. You must let the man work with hand and brain, and then out of the joy of this marriage of hand and brain, beauty will be born. It tells of a desire for harmony, peace, beauty, wholeness, holiness. Art is the expression of man's joy in his work. When you read a beautiful poem that makes your heart throb with gladness and gratitude, you are simply partaking of the emotion that the author felt when he wrote it. To possess a piece of work that the workman made in joyous animation is a source of joy to the possessor. And this love of the work done by the marriage of hand and brain can never quite go out of fashion, for we are men and women, and our hopes and aims and final destiny are at last one. Where one enjoys, all enjoy. Where one suffers, all suffer. Say what you will of the coldness and selfishness of men, at the last we long for companionship and the fellowship of our kind. We are lost children, and when alone and the darkness gathers, we long for the close relationship of the brothers and sisters we knew in our childhood, and cry for the gentle arms that once rocked us to sleep. Men are homesick amid this sad, mad rush for wealth and place and power. The calm of the country invites, and we would fain do with less things and go back to simplicity and rest our tired heads in the lap of Mother Nature. Life is expression. Life is a movement outward, an unfolding, a development. To be tied down, pinned to a task that is repugnant, and to have the shrill voice of necessity whistling eternally in your ears, do this or starve is to starve, for it starves the heart, the soul, and all the higher aspirations of your being pine away and die. At the Roycroft shop, the workers are getting an education by doing things. Work should be the spontaneous expression of a man's best impulses. We grow only through exercise, and every faculty that is exercised becomes strong, and those not used atrophy and die. Thus, how necessary it is that we should exercise our highest and best. To develop the brain, we have to exercise the body. Every muscle, every organ has its corresponding convolution in the brain. To develop the mind, we must use the body. Manual training is essentially moral training, and physical work is, at its best, mental, moral, and spiritual. And these are truths so great and yet so simple that until yesterday many wise men did not recognize them. At the Roycroft shop, we are reaching out for an all-round development through work and right living. And we have found it a good expedient, a wise business policy. Sweatshop methods can never succeed in producing beautiful things. And so the management of the Roycroft shop surrounds the workers with beauty, allows many liberties, encourages cheerfulness, and tries to promote kind thoughts, simply because it has been found that these things are transmuted into good and come out again at the fingertips of the workers in beautiful results. So we have pictures, statuary, flowers, ferns, palms, birds, and a piano in every room. We have the best sanitary appliances that money can buy. We have bathrooms, shower baths, library, restrooms. Every week we have concerts, dances, lectures. Besides being a workshop, the Roycroft is a school. We are following out a dozen distinct lines of study, and every worker in the place is enrolled as a member of one or more classes. There are no fees to pupils, but each pupil purchases his own books, the care of his books and belongings being considered a part of one's education. All the teachers are workers in the shop and are volunteers, teaching without pay, beyond what each receives for his regular labor. The idea of teaching, we have found, is a great benefit to the teacher. The teacher gets most out of the lessons. Once a week there is a faculty meeting when each teacher gives in a verbal report of his stewardship. It is responsibility that develops one, and to know that your pupils expect you to know is a great incentive to study. Then teaching demands that you shall give yourself, and he who gives most receives most. We deepen our impressions by recounting them, and he who teaches others teaches himself. I am never quite so proud as when someone addresses me as teacher. We try to find out what each person can do best, what he wants to do, and then we encourage him to put his best into it, also to do something else besides his specialty, finding rest in change. The thing that pays should be the expedient thing, and the expedient thing should be the proper and right thing. That which began with us as a matter of expediency is often referred to as a philanthropy. I do not like the word and wish to state here that the Roycroft is in no sense a charity. I do not believe in giving any man something for nothing. You give a man $1 and the man will think less of you because he thinks less of himself. But if you give him a chance to earn $1, he will think more of himself and more of you. The only way to help people is to give them a chance to help themselves. So the Roycroft idea is one of reciprocity. You help me and I'll help you. We will not be here forever anyway. Soon death, the kind old nurse, will come and rock us all to sleep, and we had better help one another while we may. We are going the same way. Let's go hand in hand. George Eliot. May I reach that purest heaven be to other souls, the cup of strength in some great agony, enkindle generous ardor, feed pure love, beget the smiles that have no cruelty, be the good presence of a good diffused, and in diffusion ever more intense. So shall I join the choir invisible, whose music is the gladness of the world. George Eliot. Warwickshire gave to the world William Shakespeare. It also gave Mary Ann Evans. No one will question that Shakespeare's is the greatest name in English literature, and among writers living or dead, in England or out of it, no woman has ever shown us power equal to that of George Eliot, in the subtle clairvoyance which divines the inmost play of passions, the experience that shows human capacity for contradiction, and the indulgence that is merciful because it understands. Shakespeare lived 300 years ago. According to the records, his father, in 1563, owned a certain house in Henley Street, Stratford-on-Avon. Hence we infer that William Shakespeare was born there, and in all our knowledge of Shakespeare's early life or later, we prefix the words, hence we infer. That the man knew all the sciences of his day, and had such a knowledge of each of the learned professions that all have claimed him as their own, we realize. He evidently was acquainted with 5 different languages, and the range of his intellect was worldwide. But where did he get this vast erudition? We do not know, and we excuse ourselves by saying that he lived 300 years ago. George Eliot lived yesterday, and we know no more about her youthful days than we do of that other child of Warwickshire. One biographer tells us that she was born in 1819, another in 1820, and neither state the day. Whereas a recent writer in the Pall Mall budget graciously bestows on us the useful information that William Shakespeare was born on the 21st day of April, 1563, at 15 minutes of 2 on a stormy morning. Concise statements of facts are always valuable, but we have none such concerning the early life of George Eliot. There is even a shadow over her parentage, for no less an authority than the American Cyclopedia Annual for 1880 boldly proclaims that she was not a foundling and, moreover, that she was not adopted by a rich retired clergyman who gave her a splendid schooling. Then the writer dives into obscurity, but presently reappears and adds that he does not know where she got her education, for all of which we are very grateful. Shakespeare left 5 signatures, each written in a different way, and now there is a goodly crew who spell it Bacon. And likewise we do not know whether it is Mary Ann Evans, or Marian Evans, for she herself is said to have used each form at various times. William Winter, gentle critic, poet, scholar, tells us that the sonnets show a dark spot in Shakespeare's moral record, and if I remember rightly, similar things have been hinted at in sewing circles concerning George Eliot. Then they each found the dew and sunshine in London that caused the flowers of genius to blossom. The early productions of both were published anonymously, and lastly, they both knew how to transmute thought into gold, for they died rich. Lady Godiva rode through the streets of Coventry, but I walked all the way from Stratford by way of Warwick, call it Warwick, please, and Kenilworth Castle. I stopped overnight at that quaint and curious little inn just across from the castle entrance. The good landlady gave me the same apartment that was occupied by Sir Walter Scott when he came here and wrote the first chapter of Kenilworth. The little room had pretty white chintz curtains tied with blue ribbon, and similar stuff draped the mirror. The bed was a big canopy affair. I had to stand on a chair in order to dive off into its feathery depths. Everything was very neat and clean, and the dainty linen had a sweet smell of lavender. I took one parting look out through the open window at the ivy-mantled towers of the old castle, which were all sprinkled with silver by the rising moon, and then I fell into gentlest sleep. I dreamed of playing I Spy through Kenilworth Castle with Shakespeare, Walter Scott, Mary Ann Evans, and a youth I used to know in boyhood by the name of Bill Hersey. We chased each other across the drawbridge, through the portcullis, down the slippery stones into the donjon keep, around the moat, and up the stone steps to the topmost turret of the towers. Finally, Shakespeare was it, but he got mad and refused to play. Walter Scott said it was no fair, and Bill Hersey thrust out the knuckle of one middle finger in a very threatening way and offered to do the boy from Stratford. Then Mary Ann rushed in to still the tempest. There's no telling what would have happened had not the landlady just then rapped at my door and asked if I had called. I awoke with a start and with the guilty feeling that I had been shouting in my sleep. I saw it was morning. No, yes, my shaving water, please. After breakfast, the landlady's boy offered for 5 shillings to take me in his donkey cart to the birthplace of George Eliot. He explained that the house was just 7 miles north, but Balaam's express is always slow, so I concluded to walk. At Coventry, a cab owner proposed to show me the house, which he declared was near Kenilworth, for 12 shillings. The advantages of seeing Kenilworth at the same time were dwelt upon at great length by cabby, but I hearkened not to the voice of the siren. I got a good lunch at the hotel and asked the innkeeper if he could tell me where George Eliot was born. He did not know, but said he could show me a house around the corner where a family of Eliots lived. Then I walked on to Nuneaton. A charming walk it was, past quaint old houses, some with straw-thatched roofs, others tile, roses clambering over the doors and flowering hedgerows white with hawthorn flowers. Occasionally I met a farmer's cart drawn by one of those great, fat, gentle shire horses that George Eliot has described so well. All spoke of peace and plenty, quiet and rest. The green fields and the flowers, the lark's song and the sunshine, the dipping willows by the stream, and the arch of the old stone bridge as I approached the village, all these I had seen and known and felt before from Mill on the Floss. I found the house where they say the novelist was born, a plain, whitewashed stone structure built 200 years ago. 2 stories, the upper chambers low with gable windows. A little garden at the side, bright with flowers, where sweet marjoram vied with onions and beets. All spoke of humble thrift and homely cares. In front was a great chestnut tree, and in the roadway near were 2 ancient elms where saucy crows were building a nest. Here, after her mother died, Mary Ann Evans was housekeeper. Little more than a child, tall, timid, and far from strong, she cooked and scrubbed and washed, and was herself the mother to brothers and sisters. Her father was a carpenter by trade and agent for a rich landowner. He was a stern man, orderly, earnest, industrious, studious. On rides about the country he would take the tall, hollow-eyed girl with him, and at such times he would talk to her of the great outside world where wondrous things were done. The child toiled hard, but found time to read and question, and there is always time to think. Soon she had outgrown some of her good father's beliefs, and this grieved him greatly. So much indeed that her extra loving attention to his needs, in a hope to neutralize his displeasure, only irritated him the more. And if there is soft, subdued sadness in much of George Eliot's writing, we can guess the reason. The onward and upward march ever means sad separation. When Mary Ann was blossoming into womanhood, her father moved over near Coventry, and here the ambitious girl first found companionship in her intellectual desires. Here she met men and women, older than herself, who were animated, earnest thinkers. They read and then they discussed, and then they spoke the things that they felt were true. Those 8 years at Coventry transformed the awkward country girl into a woman of intellect and purpose. She knew somewhat of all sciences, all philosophies, and she had become a proficient scholar in German and French. How did she acquire this knowledge? How is any education acquired if not through effort prompted by desire? She had already translated Strauss's Life of Jesus in a manner that was acceptable to the author. When Ralph Waldo Emerson came to Coventry to lecture, he was entertained at the same house where Miss Evans was stopping. Her brilliant conversation pleased him, and when she questioned the wisdom of a certain passage in one of his essays, the gentle philosopher turned, smiled, and said that he had not seen it in that light before. Perhaps she was right. "What is your favorite book?" asked Emerson. "Rousseau's Confessions," answered Mary instantly. It was Emerson's favorite too, but such honesty from a young woman. It was queer. Mr. Emerson never forgot Miss Evans of Coventry, and 10 years after, when a zealous reviewer proclaimed her the greatest novelist in England, the sage of Concord said something that sounded like, "I told you so." Miss Evans had made visits to London from time to time with her Coventry friends. When 28 years old, after one such visit to London, she came back to the country tired and weary and wrote this most womanly wish. "My only ardent desire is to find some feminine task to discharge, some possibility of devoting myself to someone and making that one purely and calmly happy." But now her father was dead and her income was very scanty. She did translating and tried the magazines with articles that generally came back respectfully declined. Then an offer came as sub-editor of the Westminster Review. It was steady work and plenty of it, and this was what she desired. She went to London and lived in the household of her employer, Mr. Chapman. Here she had the opportunity of meeting many brilliant people: Carlyle and his Jeannie Welsh, the Martineaus, Grote, Mr. and Mrs. Mill, Huxley, Mazzini, Louis Blanc. Besides, these were 2 young men who must not be left out when we sum up the influences that evolved this woman's genius. She was attracted to Herbert Spencer at once. He was about her age, and their admiration for each other was mutual. Miss Evans, writing to a friend in 1852, says, "Spencer is kind, he is delightful, and I always feel better after being with him. And we have agreed together that there is no reason why we should not see each other as often as we wish." And then later she again writes, "The bright side of my life, after the affection for my old friends, is the new and delightful friendship which I have found in Herbert Spencer. We see each other every day, and in everything we enjoy a delightful comradeship." If it were not for him, my life would be singularly arid. But about this time, another man appeared on the scene, and were it not for this other man who was introduced to Miss Evans by Spencer, the author of Synthetic Philosophy might not now be spoken of in the biographical dictionaries as having been wedded to science. It was not love at first sight, for George Henry Lewes made a decidedly unfavorable impression on Miss Evans at their first meeting. He was small, his features were insignificant. He had whiskers like an anarchist and a mouthful of crooked teeth. His personal habits were far from pleasant. It was this sort of thing, Dickens said, that caused his first wife to desert him and finally drove her into insanity. But Lewes had a brilliant mind. He was a linguist, a scientist, a novelist, a poet, and a wit. He had written biography, philosophy, and a play. He had been a journalist, a lecturer, and even an actor. Thackeray declared that if he should see Lewes perched on a white elephant in Piccadilly, he should not be in the least surprised. After having met Miss Evans several times, Mr. Lewes saw the calm depths of her mind, and he asked her to correct proofs for him. She did so, and discovered that there was merit in his work. She corrected more proofs, and when a woman begins to assist a man, the danger line is being approached. Close observers noted that a change was coming over the bohemian Lewes. He had his whiskers trimmed, his hair was combed, and the bright yellow necktie had been discarded for a clean one of modest brown, and sometimes his boots were blacked. In July 1854, Mr. Chapman received a letter from his sub-editor resigning her position, and Miss Evans notified some of her closest friends that hereafter she wished to be considered the wife of Mr. Lewes. She was then in her 36th year. The couple disappeared, having gone to Germany. Many people were shocked. Some said, "We knew it all the time," and when Herbert Spencer was informed of the fact, he exclaimed, "Goodness me," and said nothing. After 6 months spent at Weimar and other literary centres, Mr. and Mrs. Lewes returned to England and began housekeeping at Richmond. Anyone who views their old quarters there will see how very plainly and economically they were forced to live. But they worked hard, and at this time the future novelist's desire seemed only to assist her husband. That she developed the manly side of his nature none can deny. They were very happy, these two, as they wrote and copied and studied and toiled. 3 years passed, and Mrs. Lewes wrote to a friend, "I am very happy, happy with the greatest happiness that life can give, the complete sympathy and affection of a man whose mind stimulates mine and keeps up in me a wholesome activity." Mr. Lewes knew the greatness of his helpmeet. She herself did not. He urged her to write a story. She hesitated, and at last attempted it. They read the first chapter together and cried over it. Then she wrote more and always read her husband the chapters as they were turned off. He corrected, encouraged, and found a publisher. But why should I tell about it here? It's all in the Britannica, how the gentle beauty and sympathetic insight of her work touched the hearts of great and lowly alike, and of how riches began flowing in upon her. For one book she received $40,000, and her income after fortune smiled upon her was never less than $10,000 a year. Lewes was her secretary, her protector, her slave, and her inspiration. He kept at bay the public that would steal her time and put out of her reach, at her request, all reviews, good or bad, and shielded her from the interviewer, the curiosity seeker, and the greedy financier. The reason why she at first wrote under a nom de plume is plain. To the great wallowing world she was neither Miss Evans nor Mrs. Lewes, so she dropped both names as far as title pages were concerned and used a man's name instead, hoping better to elude the pack. When Adam Bede came out, a resident of Nuneaton purchased a copy and at once discovered local earmarks. The scenes described, the flowers, the stone walls, the bridges, the barns, the people, all was Nuneaton. Who wrote it? No one knew, but it was surely someone in Nuneaton. So they picked out a Mr. Liggins, a solemn-faced preacher who was always about to do something great, and they said Liggins. Soon all London said Liggins. As for Liggins, he looked wise and smiled knowingly. Then articles began to appear in the periodicals purporting to have been written by the author of Adam Bede. A book came out called Adam Bede Jr., and to protect her publisher, the public, and herself, George Eliot had to reveal her identity. Many men have written good books and never tasted fame, but few, like Liggins of Nuneaton, have become famous by doing nothing. It only proves that some things can be done as well as others. This breed of men has long dwelt in Warwickshire. Shakespeare had them in mind when he wrote, "There be men who do a wilful stillness entertain with purpose to be dressed in an opinion of wisdom, gravity, and profound conceit." Lord Acton, in an able article in the 19th century, makes this statement. George Eliot paid high for happiness with Luz. She forfeited freedom of speech, the first place among English women, and a tomb in Westminster Abbey. The original dedication in Adam Bede reads thus, "To my dear husband, George Henry Lewis, I give the manuscript of a work which would never have been written, but for the happiness which his love has conferred on my life." Lord Acton, of course, assumes that this book would have been written, dedication and all, just the same had Miss Evans never met Mr. Lewis. Once there was a child called Romola. She said to her father one day as she sat on his knee, "Papa, who would take care of me, give me my bath and put me to bed nights, if you had never happened to meet Mamma?" The days I spent in Warwickshire were very pleasant. The serene beauty of the country and the kindly courtesy of the people impressed me greatly. Having beheld the scenes of George Eliot's childhood, I desired to view the place where her last days were spent. It was a fine May day when I took the little steamer from London Bridge for Chelsea. A bird call from the dingy brick building where Turner died, and 2 blocks from the old home of Carlyle, is Cheyne Walk, a broad avenue facing the river. The houses are old, but they have a look of gracious gentility that speaks of ease and plenty. High iron fences are in front, but they do not shut off from view the climbing clematis and clusters of roses that gather over the windows and doors. I stood at the gate of number 4 Cheyne Walk and admired the pretty flowers, planted in such artistic carelessness as to beds and rows. Then I rang the bell, an old pull-out affair with polished knob. Presently a butler opened the door, a pompous, tall and awful butler in serious black and with side whiskers. He approached, came down the walk swinging a bunch of keys, looking me over as he came to see what sort of wares I had to sell. "Did George Eliot live here?" I asked through the bars. "Mrs. Cross lived here and died here, sir," came the solemn and rebuking answer. "I mean Mrs. Cross," I added meekly. "I only wished to see the little garden where she worked." Jeemes was softened. As he unlocked the gate, he said, "We have many visitors, sir. A great bother, sir. Still, I always knows a gentleman when I sees one. Perhaps you would like to see the house too, sir. The missus does not like it much, but I will take her your card, sir." I gave him the card and slipped a shilling into his hand as he gave me a seat in the hallway. He disappeared upstairs and soon returned with the pleasing information that I was to be shown the whole house and garden. So I pardoned him the myth about the missus, happening to know that at that particular moment she was at Brighton, 60 miles away. A goodly, comfortable house, 4 stories, well kept, and much fine old carved oak in the dining room and hallways. Fantastic ancient balusters and a peculiar bay window in the 2nd-story rear that looked out over the little garden. Off to the north could be seen the green of Kensington Gardens and wavy suggestions of Hyde Park. This was George Eliot's workshop. There was a table in the centre of the room and 3 low bookcases with pretty ornaments above. In the bay window was the most conspicuous object in the room, a fine marble bust of Goethe. This, I was assured, had been the property of Mrs. Cross, as well as all the books and furniture in the room. In one corner was a revolving case containing a set of the Century Dictionary, which Jeemes assured me had been purchased by Mr. Cross as a present for his wife a short time before she died. This caused my faith to waver a trifle, and put to flight a fine bit of literary frenzy that might have found form soon in a sonnet. In the front parlour, I saw a portrait of the former occupant that showed the face that looked like a horse. But that is better than to have the face of any other animal of which I know. Surely one would not want to look like a dog. Shakespeare hated dogs, but spoke 48 times in his plays in terms of respect and affection for a horse. Who would not resent the imputation that one's face was like that of a sheep or a goat or an ox? And much gore has been shed because men have referred to other men as asses. But a horse? God bless you, yes. No one has ever accused George Eliot of being handsome, but this portrait tells of a woman of 50, calm, gentle, and the strong features speak of a soul in which to confide. At Highgate, by the side of the grave of Lewes, rests the dust of this great and loving woman. As the pilgrim enters that famous old cemetery, the first imposing monument seen is a pyramid of rare, costly porphyry. As you draw near, you read this inscription: "To the memory of Anne Jewson Crisp, who departed this life deeply lamented, January 20, 1889. Also, her dog Emperor." Beneath these tender lines is a bas-relief of as vicious-looking a cur as ever evaded the dog tax. Continuing up the avenue, past this monument just noted, the kind old gardener will show you another that stands amid others much more pretentious. A small grey granite column, and on it, carved in small letters, you read, "Of those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence. Here rests the body of George Eliot, Mary Ann Cross, born 22nd November 1819, died 22nd December 1880. Thomas Carlyle. One comfort is that great men taken up in any way are profitable company. We cannot look, however imperfectly, upon a great man without gaining something by it. He is the living fountain of life, which it is pleasant to be near. On any terms whatsoever, you will not grudge to wander in his neighborhood for a while. Heroes and hero worship. Thomas Carlyle. While on my way to Dumfries, I stopped overnight at Gretna Green, which, as all fair maidens know, is in Scotland, just over the border from England. To my delight, I found that the coming of runaway couples to Gretna Green was not entirely a matter of the past. For the very evening I arrived, a blushing pair came to the inn and inquired for a minister. The lady fair was a little stout, and the worthy swain several years older than my fancy might have wished, but still I did not complain. The landlord's boy was dispatched to the rectory around the corner and soon returned with the reverend gentleman. I was an uninvited guest in the little parlour, but no one observed that my wedding garment was only a cycling costume, and I was not challenged. After the ceremony, the several other witnesses filed past the happy couple, congratulating them and kissing the bride. I did likewise, and was greeted with a resounding smack which surprised me a bit. But I managed to ask, "Did you run away?" "No," said the groom. "No, her was a widdy. We just coom over from Ecclefechan." Then lowering his voice to a confidential whisper, "We're going back on the morrow. It's cheaper than to have a big spread wedding." This answer banished all tender sentiment from me and made useless my plans for a dainty love story. But I seized upon the name of the place whence they came. "Ecclefechan, Ecclefechan, why that's where Carlyle was born." "Aye, sir, and he's buried there, a great mon he was, but an infidel." 10 miles beyond Gretna Green is Ecclefechan, a little village of stucco houses all stretched out on one street. Plain, homely, rocky, and unromantic is the country round about, and plain, homely, and unromantic is the little house where Carlyle was born. The place is shown the visitor by a good old dame who takes one from room to room, giving a little lecture meanwhile in a mixture of Gaelic and English, which was quite beyond my ken. Several relics of interest are shown, and although the house is almost precisely like all others in the vicinity, imagination throws round it all a roseate wreath of fancies. It has been left on record that up to the year when Carlyle was married, his most pleasurable times were those when he enjoyed a quiet pipe with his mother. To few men indeed is this felicity vouchsafed, but for those who have eaten oatmeal porridge in the wayside cottages of bonny Scotland, or who love to linger over the Cotter's Saturday night, there is a touch of tender pathos in the picture: the stone floor, the bare whitewashed walls, the peat smouldering on the hearth, sending out long, fitful streaks that dance among the rafters overhead, and the mother and son sitting there watching the coal, silent. The woman takes a small twig from a bundle of sticks, reaches over, lights it, applies it to her pipe, takes a few whiffs and passes the light to her son. Then they talk in low, earnest tones of man's duty to man and man's duty to God. And it was this mother who first applied the spark that fired Carlyle's ambition. It was from her that he got the germ of those talents which have made his name illustrious. Yet this woman could barely read and did not learn to write until her firstborn had gone away from the home nest. Then it was that she sharpened a grey goosequill and laboured long and patiently, practising with this instrument, said to be mightier than the sword. And with ink she herself had mixed, all that she might write a letter to her boy. And how sweetly, tenderly homely and loving are these letters as we read them today. James Carlyle, with his own hands, built in 1790 this house at Ecclefechan. The same year he married an excellent woman, a second cousin by name Janet Carlyle. She lived but a year. The poor husband was heartbroken and declared, as many men under like conditions had done before and have done since, that his sorrow was inconsolable, and he vowed that he would walk through life and down to his death alone. But it is a matter for congratulation that he broke his vow. In 2 years he married Margaret Aitken, a serving woman. She bore 9 children. Thomas was the eldest and the only one who proved recreant to the religious faith of his fathers. One of the brothers moved to Shiawassee County, Michigan, where I had the pleasure of calling on him some years ago. A hard-headed man he was, sensible, earnest, honest, with a stubby beard and a rich brogue. He held the office of school trustee, also that of poundmaster, and I was told that he served his township loyally and well. This worthy man looked with small favour on the literary pretensions of his brother Thomas, and twice wrote him long letters expostulating with him on his religious vagaries. "I knew no good could come of it," sorrowfully said he, and so I left him. But I inquired of several of the neighbours what they thought of Thomas Carlyle, and I found that they did not think of him at all, and I mounted my beast and rode away. Thomas Carlyle was educated for the kirk, and it was a cause of much sorrow to his parents that he could not accept its beliefs. He has been spoken of as England's chief philosopher, yet he subscribed to no creed, nor did he formulate one. However, in latter-day pamphlets he partially prepares a catechism for a part of the brute creation. He supposes that all swine of superior logical powers have a belief, and as they are unable to express it, he essays the task for them. The following are a few of the postulates in this creed of the Brotherhood of Latter-day Swine. Question: who made the pig? Answer: the pork butcher. Question: what is the whole duty of pigs? Answer: it is the mission of universal pighood. And the duty of all pigs at all times is to diminish the quantity of attainable swill and increase the unattainable. This is the whole duty of pigs. Question: what is pig poetry? Answer: it is the universal recognition of pigs' wash and ground barley, and the felicity of pigs whose trough has been set in order and who have enough. Question: what is justice in pigdom? Answer: it is the sentiment in pig nature sometimes called revenge, indignation, etc., which if one pig provoke, another comes out in more or less destructive manner. Hence, laws are necessary, amazing quantities of laws, defining what pigs shall not do. Question: what do you mean by equity? Answer: equity consists in getting your share from the universal swine trough and part of another's. Question: what is meant by your share? Answer: my share is getting whatever I can contrive to seize without being made up into side meat. I have slightly abridged this little extract and inserted it here to show the sympathy which Mr. Carlyle had for the dumb brute. One of America's great men, in a speech delivered not long ago, said, "From Scotch manners, Scotch religion, and Scotch whiskey, good Lord deliver us." My experience with these 3 articles has been somewhat limited, but Scotch manners remind me of chestnut burrs, not handsome without, but good within. For when you have gotten beyond the rough exterior of Sandy, you generally find a heart warm, tender, and generous. Scotch religion is only another chestnut burr, but then you need not eat the shuck if you fear it will not agree with your inward state. Nevertheless, if the example of royalty is of value, The fact can be stated that Victoria, Queen of Great Britain and Empress of India, is a Presbyterian. That is, she is a Presbyterian about one half the time, when she is in Scotland, for she is the head of the Scottish Kirk. When in England, of course, she is an Episcopalian. We have often been told that religion is largely a matter of geography, and here is a bit of something that looks like proof. Of Scotch whisky I am not competent to speak, so that subject must be left to the experts. But a Kentucky colonel at my elbow declares that it cannot be compared with the Bluegrass article, though I trust that no one will be prejudiced against it on that account. Scotch intellect, however, is worthy of our serious consideration. It is a bold, rocky headland standing out into the tossing sea of the unknown. Assertive? Yes. Stubborn? Most surely proud? By all means. Twice as many pilgrims visit the grave of Burns as that of Shakespeare. Buckle declares Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations has had a greater influence on civilization than any other book ever writ, save none. And the average Scotchman knows his Carlyle a deal better than the average American knows his Emerson. In fact, 4 times as many of Carlyle's books have been printed. When Carlyle took time to bring the ponderous machinery of his intellect to bear on a theme, he saw it through and through. The vividness of his imagination gives us a true insight into times long since gone by. It shows virtue her own feature, vice her own image, and the very age and body of the time his form and pressure. In history, he goes beyond the political and conventional, showing us the thought, the hope, the fear, the passion of the soul. His was the masculine mind, the divination and subtle intuitions which are to be found scattered through his pages like violets growing among the rank swale of the prairies. All these sweet, odorous things came from his wife. She gave him of her best thought, and he greedily absorbed it, and unconsciously wrote it down as his own. There are those who blame and berate. Volumes have been written to show the inconsiderateness of this man toward the gentle lady who was his intellectual comrade. But they know not life who do this thing. It is a fact that Carlyle never rushed to pick up Jeannie's handkerchief. I admit that he could not bow gracefully, that he could not sing tenor, nor waltz, nor tell funny stories, nor play the mandolin. And if I had been his neighbor, I would not have attempted to teach him any of these accomplishments. Once he took his wife to the theater, and after the performance he accidentally became separated from her in the crowd and trudged off home alone and went to bed forgetting all about her. But even for this I do not indict him. Mrs. Carlyle never upbraided him for this forgetfulness, neither did she relate the incident to anyone, and for these things I to her now reverently lift my hat. Jeannie Welsh Carlyle had capacity for pain, as it seems all great souls have. She suffered, but then suffering is not all suffering, and pain is not all pain. Life is often dark, but then there are rifts in the clouds when we behold the glorious deep blue of the sky. Not a day passes but that the birds sing in the branches, and the treetops poise backward and forward in restful rhythmic harmony, and never an hour goes by but that hope bears us up on her wings as the eagle does her young. And ever just before the year dies and the frost comes, the leaves take on a gorgeous hue, and the color of the flowers then puts to shame for brilliancy all the plainer petals of springtime. And I know Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle were happy, so happy at times that they laughed and cried for joy. Jeannie gave all, and she saw her best thought used, carried further, written out and given to the world as that of another, but she uttered no protest. Xantippe lives in history only because she sought to worry a great philosopher. We remember the daughter of Herodias because she demanded the head, not the heart, of a good man. Goneril and Regan because they trod upon the withered soul of their sire. Lady Macbeth because she lured her liege to murder. Charlotte Corday for her dagger thrust. Lucrezia Borgia for her poison. Sapphira for her untruth. Jael because she pierced the brain of Sisera with a rusty nail instead of an idea. Delilah for the reason that she deprived Samson of his source of strength. And in the Westminster Review for May 1894, Ouida makes the flat statement that for every man of genius who has been helped by a woman, 10 have been dragged down. But Jeannie Welsh Carlyle lives in the hearts of all who reverence the sweet, the gentle, the patient, the earnest, the loving spirit of the womanly woman. Lives because she ministered to the needs of a great man. She was ever a frail body. Several long illnesses kept her to her bed for weeks, but she recovered from these, even in spite of the doctors, who thoroughly impressed both herself and her husband with the thought of her frailty. On April the 21st, 1866, she called her carriage, as was her custom, and directed the driver to go through the park. She carried a book in her hands and smiled a greeting to a friend as the brougham moved away from the little street where they lived. The driver drove slowly, drove for an hour, two. He got down from his box to receive the orders of his mistress, touched his hat as he opened the carriage door, but no kindly eyes looked into his. She sat back in the corner as if resting, the shapely head a little thrown forward, the book held gently in the delicate hands, but the fingers were cold and stiff. Jeannie Welsh was dead, and Thomas Carlyle was alone. Along the Thames at Chelsea, opposite the rows of quiet and well-kept houses of Cheyne Walk, is the Embankment, a parkway it is of narrow green, with gravelled walks, bushes and trees that here and there grow lush and lusty, as if to hide the unsightly river from the good people who live across the street. Following this pleasant bit of breathing space, with its walks that wind in and out among the bushes, one comes unexpectedly upon a bronze statue. You need not read the inscription, a glance at that shaggy head, the grave, sober, earnest look, and you exclaim under your breath, "Carlyle!" In this statue, the artist has caught with rare skill the look of reverie and repose. One can imagine that on a certain night, as the mists and shadows of evening were gathering along the dark river, the gaunt form, wrapped in its accustomed cloak, came stalking down the little street to the park, just as he did thousands of times, and taking his seat in the big chair, fell asleep. In the morning, the children that came to play along the river found the form in cold, enduring bronze. At the play, we have seen the marble transformed by love into beauteous life. How much easier the reverse, here where souls stay only a day. Cheyne Row is a little alley-like street, running only a block with 15 houses on one side and 12 on the other. These houses are all brick and built right up to the sidewalk. On the north side, they are all in one block, and one at first sees no touch of individuality in any of them. They are old and solid and plain, built for revenue only. On closer view, I thought one or two had been painted, and on one there was a cornice that set it off from the rest. As I stood on the opposite side and looked at this row of houses, I observed that number 5 was the dingiest and plainest of them all, for there were dark shutters instead of blinds, and these shutters were closed, all save one rebel that swung and creaked in the breeze. Over the doorway, sparrows had made their nests and were fighting and scolding. Swallows hovered above the chimney. Dust, cobwebs, neglect were all about. And as I looked, there came to me the words of Ursa Thomas. Brief, brawling day, with its noisy phantoms, its paper crowns, tinsel gilt, is gone, and divine, everlasting night, with her star diadems, with her silences and her verities, is come. Here walked Thomas and Jeannie one fair May morning in 1834. Thomas was 39, tall and swarthy, strong, with set mouth and 3 wrinkles on his forehead that told of care and dyspepsia. Jeannie was younger, her face winsome, just a trifle anxious, with luminous, gentle eyes, suggestive of patience, truth, and loyalty. They looked like country folks, did these two. They examined the surroundings, consulted together. £60 rent a year seemed very high. But they took the house, and T. Carlyle, son of James Carlyle, stonemason, paid rent for it every month for half a century, lacking 3 years. I walked across the street and read the inscription on the marble tablet inserted in the front of the house above the lower windows. It informs the stranger that Thomas Carlyle lived here from 1834 to 1881, and that the tablet was erected by the Carlyle Society of London. I ascended the stone steps and scraped my boots on the well-worn scraper, made long, long ago by a blacksmith who is now dust, and who must have been a very awkward mechanic, for I saw where he had made a misstroke with his hammer, probably as he discussed theology with a caller. Then I rang the bell and plied the knocker and waited there on the steps for Jeanie Welsh to come bid me welcome, just as she did Emerson when he, too, used the scraper and plied the knocker and stood where I did then. And my knock was answered by a very sour and peevish woman next door, who thrust her head out of the window and exclaimed in a shrill voice, "Look here, sir, you might as well go rap on the curbstone, don't you know? There's nobody living there, sir, don't you know?" "Yes, madam, that is why I knocked." "Begging your pardon, sir, if you use your eyes, you'll see there's nobody living there, don't you know?" "I knocked lest offence be given. How can I get in?" "You might go in through the keyhole, sir, or down the chimney. You seem to be a little daft, sir, don't you know? But if you must get in, perhaps it would be as well to go over to Mrs. Brown's and bring the key." And she slammed down the window. Across the street, Mrs. Brown's sign smiled at me. Mrs. Brown keeps a little grocery and bake shop and was very willing to show me the house. She fumbled in a black bag for the keys, all the time telling me of 3 Americans who came last week to see Carlyle's house, and as how they each gave her a shilling, I took the hint. "Only Americans care now for Mr. Carlyle," plaintively added the old lady as she fished out the keys. "Soon we will all be forgot." We walked across the street, and after several ineffectual attempts, the rusty lock was made to turn. I entered. Cold, bare, and bleak was the sight of those empty rooms. The old lady had a touch of rheumatism, so she waited for me on the doorstep as I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The noise-proof back room, where the French Revolution was writ twice over, was so dark that I had to grope my way across to the window. The sash stuck and seemed to have a will of its own, like him who so often had raised it. But at last it gave way, and I flung wide the shutter and looked down at the little arbour where Teufelsdrockh sat so often and wooed wisdom with the weed brought from Virginia. Then I stood before the fireplace, where he of the eternities had so often sat and watched the flickering embers. Here he lived in his loneliness and cursed curses that were prayers, and here for near 5 decades he read and thought and dreamed and wrote. Here the spirits of Cromwell and Frederick hovered. Here that pitiful and pitiable long line of ghostly partakers in the Revolution answered to his roll call. The wind whistled down the chimney gruesomely as my footfalls echoed through the silent chambers, and I thought I heard a sepulchral voice say, "Thy future life, thy fate is it indeed. Whilst thou makest that thy chief question, thy life to me and to thyself and to thy God is worthless. What is incredible to thee thou shalt not, at thy soul's peril, pretend to believe elsewhither for a refuge. Away, go to perdition if thou wilt, but not with a lie in thy mouth, by the eternal Maker, no." I was startled at first, but stood still listening. Then I thought I saw a faint blue cloud of mist curling up in the fireplace. Watching this smoke and sitting before it in gloomy abstraction was the form of an old man. I swept my hand through the apparition, but still it stayed. My lips moved in spite of myself, and I said, "Hail, hard-headed man of granite outcrop and heather, of fen and crag, of moor and mountain, and of bleak east wind, hail! 86 years didst thou live. 100 years lacking 14 didst thou suffer, enjoy, weep, dream, groan, pray, and strike thy rugged breast. And yet methinks that in those years there was much quiet peace and sweet content, for constant pain benumbs, and worry destroys, and vain unrest summons the grim messenger of death, but thou didst live and work and love. Howbeit, thy touch was not always gentle, nor thy voice low, but on thy lips was no lie, in thy thought no concealment, in thy heart no pollution. But mark, thou didst come out of poverty and obscurity, on thy battered shield there was no crest, and thou didst leave all to follow truth. And verily, she did lead thee a merry chase. Thou hadst no past, but thou hast a future. Thou didst say, 'Bury me in Westminster never,' where the mob surges, cursed with idle curiosity to see the graves of kings and nobodies. No, take me back to rugged Scotland and lay my tired form to rest by the side of an honest man, my father. Thou didst refuse the knighthood offered thee by royalty, saying, 'I am not the founder of the house of Carlisle, and I have no sons to be pauperized by a title.' True, Thou didst leave no sons after the flesh to mourn thy loss, nor fair daughters to bedeck thy grave with garlands. But thou didst reproduce thyself in thought, and on the minds of men thou didst leave thy impress. And thy 10,000 sons will keep thy memory green so long as men shall work, and toil, and strive, and hope. The wind still howled. I looked out and saw watery clouds scudding athwart the face of the murky sky. The shutters banged and shut me in the dark. I made haste to find the door, reached the stairway, slid down the banisters to where Mrs. Brown was waiting for me at the threshold. We locked the door. She went across to her little bake shop, and I stopped a passing policeman to ask the way to Westminster. He told me. "Did you visit Carlyle's house?" he asked. "Yes." "With old Mrs. Brown?" "Yes, she waited for me in the doorway. She had the rheumatism, so she could not climb the stairs." "Rheumatism? Huh! You couldn't hire her to go inside. Why, don't you know? They say the house is haunted." John Ruskin. Put roses in their hair, put precious stones on their breasts, see that they are clothed in purple and scarlet with other delights, that they also learn to read the gilded heraldry of the sky, and upon the earth be taught not only the labours of it, but the loveliness. Deucalion, John Ruskin. At Windermere, a good friend told me that I must abandon all hope of seeing Mr. Ruskin, for I had no special business with him, no letters of introduction, and then the fact that I am an American made it final Americans in England are supposed to pick flowers in private gardens, cut their names on trees, laugh boisterously at trifles, and often to make invidious comparisons. Very properly, Mr. Ruskin does not admire these things. Then Mr. Ruskin is a very busy man. Occasionally he issues a printed manifesto to his friends requesting them to give him peace. A copy of one such circular was shown to me. It runs, "Mr. J. Ruskin is about to begin a work of great importance and therefore begs that in reference to calls and correspondence, you will consider him dead for the next 2 months. A similar notice is reproduced in Arrows of the Chase, and this one thing, I think, illustrates as forcibly as anything in Mr. Ruskin's work the self-contained characteristics of the man himself. Surely if a man is pleased to be considered dead occasionally, even to his kinsmen and friends, he should not be expected to receive with open arms an enemy to steal away his time. This is assuming, of course, that all individuals who pick flowers in other folks' gardens, cut their names on trees, and laugh boisterously at trifles are enemies. I therefore decided that I would simply walk over to Brantwood, view it from a distance, tramp over its hills, row across the lake, and at nightfall take a swim in its waters. Then I would rest at the inn for a space and go my way. Lake Coniston is 10 miles from Grasmere, and even alone the walk is not long. If, however, you are delightfully attended by king's daughters with whom you sit and commune now and then on the bankside, the distance will seem to be much less. Then there is a pleasant little break in the journey at Hawkshead. Here one may see the quaint old schoolhouse where Wordsworth, when a boy, dangled his feet from a bench and proved his humanity by carving his initials on the seat. The inn at the head of Coniston Water appeared very inviting and restful when I saw it that afternoon. Built in sections from generation to generation, half covered with ivy and embowered in climbing roses, it is an institution entirely different from the Grand Palace Hotel at Oshkosh. In America, we have gongs that are fiercely beaten at stated times by gentlemen of color, just as they are supposed to do in their native Congo jungles. This din proclaims to the guests and to the public at large that it is time to come in and be fed. But this refinement of civilization is not yet in Coniston, and the inn is quiet and homelike. You may go to bed when you are tired, get up when you choose, and eat when you are hungry. There were no visitors about when I arrived, and I thought I would have the coffee room all to myself at luncheon time. But presently there came in a pleasant-faced old gentleman in knickerbockers. He bowed to me and then took a place at the table. He said that it was a fine day, and I agreed with him, adding that the mountains were very beautiful. He assented, putting in a codicil to the effect that the lake was very pretty. Then the waiter came for our orders. "Together, I suppose?" remarked Thomas inquiringly as he halted at the door and balanced the tray on his fingertips. "Yes, serve lunch for us together," said the ruddy old gentleman, as he looked at me and smiled. "To eat alone is bad for the digestion." I nodded assent. "Can you tell me how far it is to Brantwood?" I asked. "Oh, not far, just across the lake." He arose and flung the shutter open so I could see the old yellow house about a mile across the water, nestling in its wealth of green on the hillside. Soon the waiter brought our lunch, and while we discussed the chops and new potatoes, we talked Ruskiniana. The old gentleman knew a deal more of stones of Venice and modern painters than I, but I told him how Thoreau introduced Ruskin to America and how Concord was the first place in the New World to recognize this star in the East. And upon my saying this, the old gentleman brought his knife handle down on the table, declaring that Thoreau and Whitman were the only two men of genius that America had produced. I begged him to make it three and include Emerson, which he finally consented to do. By and by the waiter cleared the table preparatory to bringing in the coffee. The old gentleman pushed his chair back, took the napkin from under his double chin, brushed the crumbs from his goodly front, and remarked, "I'm going over to Brantwood this afternoon to call on Mr. Ruskin, just to pay my respects to him, as I always do when I come here. Can't you go with me?" I think this was about the most pleasing question I ever had asked me. I was going to request him to come again just for the joy of hearing the words, but I pulled my dignity together, straightened up, swallowed my coffee red hot, pushed my chair back, flourished my napkin, and said, "I shall be very pleased to go." So we went, we two, he in his knickerbockers and I in my checks and outing shirt. I congratulated myself on looking no worse than he, and as for him, he never seemed to think that our costumes were not exactly what they should be. And after all, it matters little how you dress when you call on one of nature's noblemen. They demand no livery. We walked around the northern end of Coniston Water, along the eastern edge, past Tent House, where Tennyson once lived, and found it outrageous quiet. And a mile farther on, we came to Brantwood. The road curves into the back of the house, which, by the way, is the front, and the driveway is lined with great trees that form a complete archway. There is no lodge-keeper, no flower beds laid out with square and compass, no trees trimmed to appear like elephants, no cast-iron dogs, nor terracotta deer, and strangest of all, no sign of the lawn-mower. There is nothing, in fact, to give forth a sign that the great apostle of beauty lives in this very old-fashioned spot. Big boulders are to be seen here and there where nature left them, tangles of vines running over old stumps, part of the meadow cut close with a scythe, and part growing up as if the owner knew the price of hay. Then there are flower beds where grow clusters of poppies and hollyhocks, purple and scarlet and white, prosaic gooseberry bushes, plain Yankee pie plant, from which the English make tarts, rue and sweet marjoram, with patches of fennel, sage, thyme, and catnip, all lined off with boxwood, making me think of my grandmother's garden at Roxbury. On the hillside above the garden, we saw the entrance to the cave that Mr. Ruskin once filled with ice, just to show the world how to keep its head cool at small expense. He even wrote a letter to the papers giving the bright idea to humanity that the way to utilize caves was to fill them with ice. Then he forgot all about the matter. But the following June, when the cook, wishing to make some ice cream as a glad surprise for the Sunday dinner, opened the natural ice chest, she found only a pool of muddy water and exclaimed, "Botheration!" Then they had custard instead of ice cream. We walked up the steps, and my friend let the brass knocker drop just once, for only Americans give a rat-a-tat-tat, and the door was opened by a white-whiskered butler, who took our cards and ushered us into the library. My heart beat a trifle fast as I took inventory of the room, for I never before had called on a man who was believed to have refused the poet laureateship. A dimly lighted room was this library, walls painted brown, running up to mellow yellow at the ceiling, high bookshelves with a stepladder, and only 5 pictures on the walls. And of these 3 were etchings and 2 watercolors of a very simple sort, leather-covered chairs, a long table in the center on which were strewn sundry magazines and papers, also several photographs, and at one end of the room a big fireplace where a yew log smoldered. Here my inventory was cut short by a cheery voice behind. "Ah, now, gentlemen, I am glad to see you." There was no time nor necessity for a formal introduction. The great man took my hand as if he had always known me, as perhaps he thought he had. Then he greeted my friend in the same way, stirred up the fire, for it was a north of England summer day, and took a seat by the table. We were all silent for a space, a silence without embarrassment. "You are looking at the etching over the fireplace. It was sent to me by a young lady in America," said Mr. Ruskin, "and I placed it there to get acquainted with it. I like it more and more. Do you know the scene?" I knew the scene and explained somewhat about it. Mr. Ruskin has the faculty of making his interviewer do most of the talking. He is a rare listener and leans forward, putting a hand behind his right ear to get each word you say. He was particularly interested in the industrial conditions of America, and I soon found myself occupying the time, while an occasional word of interrogation from Mr. Ruskin gave me no chance to stop. I came to hear him, not to defend our Republican experiment, as he was pleased to call the United States of America. Yet Mr. Ruskin was so gentle and respectful in his manner, and so complimentary in his attitude of listener, that my impatience at his want of sympathy for our experiment only caused me to feel a little heated. The fact of women being elected to mayoralties in Kansas makes me think of certain African tribes that exalt their women into warriors. You want your women to fight your political battles. You evidently hold the same opinion on the subject of equal rights that you expressed some years ago, interposed my companion. What did I say? Really, I have forgotten. You replied to a correspondent saying, "You are certainly right as to my views respecting the female franchise. So far from wishing to give votes to women, I would fain take them away from most men." Surely that was a sensible answer. My respect for woman is too great to force on her increased responsibilities. Then, as for restricting the franchise with men, I am of the firm conviction that no man should be allowed to vote who does not own property, or who cannot do considerably more than read and write. The voter makes the laws, and why should the laws regulating the holding of property be made by a man who has no interest in property beyond a covetous desire? Or why should he legislate on education when he possesses none? Then again, women do not bear arms to protect the state. But what do you say to Mrs. Carlock, who answers that inasmuch as men do not bear children, they have no right to vote? Going to war possibly being necessary and possibly not, but the perpetuity of the state demanding that someone bear children. The lady's argument is ingenious but lacks force when we consider that the bearing of arms is a matter relating to statecraft, while the baby question is Dame Nature's own and is not to be regulated even by the sovereign. Then Mr. Ruskin talked for nearly 15 minutes on the duty of the state to the individual, talked very deliberately, but with the clearness and force of a man who believes what he says and says what he believes. Thus, my friend, by a gentle thrust under the fifth rib of Mr. Ruskin's logic, caused him to come to the rescue of his previously expressed opinions, and we had the satisfaction of hearing him discourse earnestly and eloquently. Maiden ladies usually have an opinion ready on the subject of masculine methods, and conversely, much of the world's logic on the woman question has come from the bachelor brain. Mr. Ruskin went quite out of his way on several occasions in times past to attack John Stuart Mill for heresy in opening up careers for women other than that of wife and mother. When Mill did not answer Mr. Ruskin's newspaper letters, the author of Sesame and Lilies called him a cretinous wretch and referred to him as the man of no imagination. Mr. Mill may have been a cretinous wretch. I do not exactly understand the phrase, but the preface to On Liberty is at once the tenderest, highest, and most sincere compliment paid to a woman, of which I know. The life of Mr. and Mrs. John Stuart Mill shows that perfect mating is possible. Yet Mr. Ruskin has only scorn for the opinions of Mr. Mill on a subject which Mill came as near personally solving in a matrimonial experiment as any other public man of modern times, not excepting even Robert Browning. Therefore we might suppose Mr. Mill entitled to speak on the woman question, and I intimated as much to Mr. Ruskin. He might know all about one woman, and if he should regard her as a sample of all womankind, Would he not make a great mistake? I was silenced. In Fors Clavigera, Letter Lix, the author says, I never wrote a letter in my life which all the world is not welcome to read. From this one might imagine that Mr. Ruskin never loved, no pressed flowers in books, no passages of poetry double-marked and scored, no bundles of letters faded and yellow, sacred for his own eye, tied with white or dainty blue ribbon, no little nothings hidden away in the bottom of a trunk. And yet Mr. Ruskin has his ideas on the woman question, and very positive ideas they are too, often sweetly sympathetic and wisely helpful. I see that one of the encyclopedias mentions Ruskin as a bachelor, which is giving rather an extended meaning to the word, for although Mr. Ruskin married, he was not mated. According to Collingwood's account, this marriage was a quiet arrangement between parents. Anyway, the genius is like the profligate in this. When he marries, he generally makes a woman miserable, and misery is reactionary as well as infectious. Ruskin is a genius. Genius is unique. No satisfactory analysis of it has yet been given. We know a few of its indications, that's all. First among these is ability to concentrate. No seed can sow genius, no soil can grow it. Its quality is inborn and defies both cultivation and extermination. To be surpassed is never pleasant. To feel your inferiority is to feel a pang. Seldom is there a person great enough to find satisfaction in the success of a friend. The pleasure that excellence gives is oft tainted by resentment, and so the woman who marries a genius is usually unhappy. Genius is excess. It is obstructive to little plans. It is difficult to warm yourself at a conflagration. The tempest may blow you away, the sun dazzles, lightning seldom strikes gently, the Nile overflows. Genius has its times of straying off into the infinite, and then what is the good wife to do for companionship? Does she protest and find fault? It could not be otherwise, for genius is dictatorial without knowing it, obstructive without wishing to be, intolerant unawares, and unsocial because it cannot help it. The wife of a genius sometimes takes his fits of abstraction for stupidity, and having the man's interests at heart, she endeavors to arouse him from his lethargy by chiding him. Occasionally he arouses enough to chide back, and so it has become an axiom that genius is not domestic. A short period of mismated life told the wife of Ruskin their mistake, and she told him. But Mrs. Grundy was at the keyhole, ready to tell the world, and so Mr. and Mrs. Ruskin sought to deceive society by pretending to live together. They kept up this appearance for 6 sorrowful years, and then the lady simplified the situation by packing her trunks and deliberately leaving her genius to his chimeras, her soul doubtless softened by the knowledge that she was bestowing a benefit on him by going away. The lady afterwards became the happy wife and helpmeet of a great artist. Ruskin's father was a prosperous importer of wines. He left his son a fortune equal to a little more than $1 million. But that vast fortune has gone, principal and interest, gone in bequests, gifts, and experiments, and today Mr. Ruskin has no income save that derived from the sale of his books. Talk about distribution of wealth. Here we have it. The bread and butter question has never troubled John Ruskin except in his ever-ardent desire that others should be fed. His days have been given to study and writing from his very boyhood. He has made money, but he has had no time to save it. He has expressed himself on every theme that interests mankind, except perhaps Housemaid's Knee. He has written more letters to the newspapers than Old Subscriber, Fiat Justitia, Indignant Reader, and Veritas combined. His opinions have carried much weight and directed attention into necessary lines, but perhaps his success as an inspirer of thought lies in the fact that his sense of humor exists only as a trace. As the chemist might say, men who perceive the ridiculous would never have voiced many of the things which he has said. Surely those Sioux Indians who stretched a hay lariat across the Union Pacific Railroad in order to stop the running of trains had small sense of the ridiculous. But it looks as if they were apostles of Ruskin, everyone. Someone has said that no man can appreciate the beautiful who has not a keen sense of humor. For the beautiful is the harmonious, and the laughable is the absence of fit adjustment. Mr. Ruskin disproves the maxim. But let no hasty soul imagine that John Ruskin's opinions on practical themes are not useful. He brings to bear an energy on every subject he touches, and what subject has he not touched, that is sure to make the sparks of thought fly. His independent and fearless attitude awakens from slumber a deal of dozing intellect, and out of this strife of opinion comes truth. On account of Mr. Ruskin's refusing at times to see visitors, reports have gone abroad that his mind was giving way. Not so, for although he is 74, he is as serenely stubborn as he ever was. His opposition to new inventions in machinery has not relaxed a single pulley's turn. You grant his premises, and in his conclusions you will find that his belt never slips, and that his logic never jumps a cog. His life is as regular and exact as the trains on the Great Western, and his days are more peaceful than ever before. He has regular hours for writing, study, walking, reading, eating, and working out of doors, superintending the cultivation of his 100 acres. He told me that he had not varied a half hour in 2 years from a certain time of going to bed or getting up in the morning. Although his form is bowed, this regularity of life has borne fruit in the rich russet of his complexion, the mild, clear eye, and the pleasure in living in spite of occasional pain, which you know the man feels. His hair is thick and nearly white. The beard is now worn quite long and gives a patriarchal appearance to the fine face. When we arose to take our leave, Mr. Ruskin took a white felt hat from the elk antlers in the hallway and a stout stick from the corner, and offered to show us a nearer way back to the village. We walked down a footpath through the tall grass to the lake, where he called our attention to various varieties of ferns that he had transplanted there. We shook hands with the old gentleman and thanked him for the pleasure he had given us. He was still examining the ferns when we lifted our hats and bade him good day. He evidently did not hear us, for I heard him mutter, "I verily believe those miserable Cook's tourists that were down here yesterday picked some of my ferns." William E. Gladstone. As the aloe is said to flower only once in 100 years, so it seems to be but once in 1,000 years that nature blossoms into this unrivaled product and produces such a man as we have here. Gladstone, Lecture on Homer. William E. Gladstone. American travelers in England are said to accumulate sometimes large and unique assortments of lisps, drawls, and other very peculiar things. Of the value of these acquirements as regards their use and beauty, I have not room here to speak, but there is one adjunct which England has that we positively need, and that is boots. It may be that Boots is indigenous to England's soil, and that when transplanted he withers and dies. Perhaps there is a quality in our atmosphere that kills him. Anyway, we have no Boots. When trouble, adversity, or bewilderment comes to the homesick traveler in an American hotel, to whom can he turn for consolation? Alas, the porter is afraid of the guest, and all guests are afraid of the clerk, and the proprietor is never seen, and the Afro-Americans in the dining room are stupid, and the chambermaid does not answer the ring, and at last the weary wanderer hies him to the bar-room and soon discovers that the worthy bar-keep has nothing to recommend him but his diamond pin. How different, yes, how different this would all be if Boots were only here. At the quaint old city of Chester, I was met at the Stee Shun by the Boots of that excellent though modest hotel, which stands only a block away. Boots picked out my baggage without my looking for it, took me across to the inn, and showed me to the daintiest, most home-like little room I had seen for weeks. On the table was a tastefully decorated jug, evidently just placed there in anticipation of my arrival, and in this jug was a large bunch of gorgeous roses, the morning dew still on them. When Boots had brought me hot water for shaving, he disappeared and did not come back until, by the use of telepathy, for Boots is always psychic, I had sent him a message that he was needed. In the afternoon he went with me to get a draft cashed. Then he identified me at the post office and introduced me to a dignitary at the cathedral whose courtesy added greatly to my enjoyment of the visit. The next morning after breakfast, when I returned to my room, everything was put to rights, and a fresh bouquet of cut flowers was on the mantel. A good breakfast adds much to one's inward peace. I sat down before the open window and looked out at the great oaks dotting the green meadows that stretched away to the north, and listened to the drowsy tinkle of sheep bells as the sound came floating in on the perfumed breeze. I was thinking how good it was to be here, when the step of boots was heard in the doorway. I turned and saw that mine own familiar friend had lost a little of his calm self-reliance. In fact, he was a bit agitated, but he soon recovered his breath. "Mr. Gladstone and his lady have just arrived, sir. They will be here for an hour before taking the train for London, sir. I told his clerk there was a party of Americans here that were very anxious to meet him, and he will receive you in the parlour in 15 minutes, sir." Then it was my turn to be agitated. But Boots reassured me by explaining that the grand old man was just the plainest, most unpretentious gentleman one could imagine, that it was not at all necessary that I should change my suit, that I should pronounce it Gladstone, not Gladstone, and that it was Harden, not Harwarden. Then he stood me up, looked me over, and declared that I was all right. On going downstairs, I found that Boots had gotten together 5 Americans who happened to be in the hotel. He introduced us to a bright little man who seemed to be the companion or secretary of the Prime Minister. He, in turn, took us into the parlour where Mr. Gladstone sat reading the morning paper and presented us one by one to the great man. We were each greeted with a pleasant word and a firm grasp of the hand, and then the old gentleman turned and with a courtly flourish said, "Gentlemen, allow me to present you to Mrs. Gladstone." Mr. Gladstone was wise. He remained standing. This was sure to shorten the interview. A clergyman in our party, who had an impressive cough and bushy whiskers, acted as spokesman and said several pleasant things, closing his little speech by informing Mr. Gladstone that Americans held him in great esteem, and that we only regretted that fate had not decreed that he should have been born in the United States. Mr. Gladstone replied, "Fate is often unkind." Then he asked if we were going to London. On being told that we were, he spoke for 5 minutes about the things we should see in the metropolis. His style was not conversational, but after the manner of a man who was much used to speaking in public or to receiving delegations. The sentences were stately, the voice rather loud and declamatory. His closing words were, "Yes, gentlemen, the way to see London is from the top of a bus, gentlemen." Then there was an almost imperceptible wave of the hand, and we knew that the interview was ended. In a moment we were outside and the door was closed. The 5 Americans who made up our little company had never met before, but now we were as brothers. We adjourned to a side room to talk it over and tell of the things we intended to say but didn't. We all talked and talked at once, just as people do who have recently preserved an enforced silence. How ill-fitting was that grey suit? Yes, the sleeves too long. Did you notice the absence of the forefinger of his left hand, shot off in 1845 while hunting, they say? But how strong his voice is. He looks like a farmer. 85 years of age. Think of it, and how vigorous. Then the preacher spoke, and his voice was sorrowful. "Oh, but I made a botch of it. Was it sarcasm or was it not?" "Was what sarcasm?" "When Mr. Gladstone said that fate was unkind in not having him born in the United States." And we were all silent. Then Boots came in, and we put the question to Boots, who decided it was not sarcasm. The next day, when we went away, we rewarded Boots bountifully. William Gladstone is England's glory. Yet there is no English blood in his veins. His parents were Scotch. Aside from Lord Brougham, he is the only Scotchman who has ever taken a prominent part in British statecraft. The name as we first find it is Gledstane, Gled being a hawk, literally a hawk that lives among the stones. Surely the hawk is fully as respectable a bird as the eagle, and a goodly amount of granite in the clay that is used to make a man is no disadvantage. The name fits. There are deep-rooted theories in the minds of many men, and still more women, that bad boys make good men, and that a dash of the pirate, even in a prelate, does not disqualify. But I wish to come to the defense of the Sunday school storybooks and show that their very prominent moral is right after all. It pays to be good. William Ewart Gladstone was sent to Eton when 12 years of age. From the first, his conduct was a model of propriety. He attended every chapel service and said his prayers in the morning and before going to bed at night. He could repeat the catechism backwards or forwards and recite more verses of scripture than any other boy in school. He always spoke the truth. He never played hooky, nor as he grew older would he tell stories of doubtful flavor or allow others to relate such in his presence. His influence was for good, and Cardinal Manning has said that there was less wine drunk at Oxford during the 40s than would have been the case if Gladstone had not been there in the 30s. He graduated from Christ Church with the highest possible honours the college could bestow, and at 22 he seemed like one who had sprung into life full-armed. At that time he had magnificent health, a fine form, vast and varied knowledge, and a command of language so great that he was a master of forensics. His speeches were fully equal to his later splendid efforts. In feature he was handsome, the face bold and masculine, eyes of piercing lustre, and hair which he tossed when in debate like a lion's mane. He could speak 5 languages, sing tenor, dance gracefully, and was on more than speaking terms with many of the best and greatest men in England. Besides all this, he was rich in British gold. Now here is a combination of good things that would send most young men straight to perdition. Not so Gladstone. He took the best care of his health, systematized his time as a miser might, listened not to the flatterers, and used his money only for good purposes. His intention was to enter the church, but his father said, "Not yet," and half forced him into politics. So at this early age of 22, he ran for Parliament, was elected, and has practically never been out of the shadow of Westminster Palace during these 60-odd years. At 33, he was a member of the cabinet. At 36, his absolute honesty compelled him for conscience's sake to resign from the ministry. His opponents then said, "Gladstone is an extinct volcano," and they have said this again and again. But somehow the volcano always breaks out in a new place, stronger and brighter than ever. It is difficult to subdue a volcano. When 29, he married Catherine Glynn, sister and heir of Sir Stephen Glynn, Baronet. The marriage was most fortunate in every way. For over 50 years, this most excellent woman has been his comrade, counsellor, consolation, friend, his wife. "How can any adversity come to him who hath a wife?" said Chaucer. If this splendid woman had died, then his opponents might truthfully have said, "Gladstone is an extinct volcano," but she is still with him, and a short time ago, when he had to undergo an operation for cataract, this woman of 80 was his only nurse. The influence of Gladstone has been of untold value to England. His ideals for national action have been high. To the material prosperity of the country, he has added millions upon millions. He has made education popular and schooling easy. His policy in the main has been such as to command the admiration of the good and great. But there are spots on the sun. On reading Mr. Gladstone's books, I find he has vigorously defended certain measures that seem unworthy of his genius. He has palliated human slavery as a necessary evil, has maintained the visibility and divine authority of the Church, has asserted the mathematical certainty of the historic episcopate, the mystical efficacy of the sacraments, and has vindicated the Church of England as the God-appointed guardian of truth. He has fought bitterly any attempt to improve the divorce laws of England. Much has been done in this line, even in spite of his earnest opposition, but we now owe it to Mr. Gladstone that there is on England's law books a statute providing that if a wife leaves her husband, he can invoke a magistrate, whose duty it will then be to issue a writ and give it to an officer who will bring her back. More than this, when the officer has returned the woman, the loving husband has the legal right to reprove her. Just what reprove means the courts have not yet determined. For in a recent decision, when a costermonger admitted having given his lady a taste of the cat, the prisoner was discharged on the ground that it was only needed reproof. I would not complain of this law if it worked both ways, but no wife can demand that the state shall return her man willy-nilly. And if she administers reproof to her mate, She does it without the sanction of the sovereign. However, in justice to Englishmen, it should be stated that while this unique law still stands on the statute books, it is very seldom that a man in recent years has stooped to invoke it. On all the questions I have named, from slavery to divorce, Mr. Gladstone has used the Bible argument. But as the years have gone by, his mind has become liberalized, and on many points where he was before zealous, he is now silent. In 1841, he argued with much skill and ingenuity that Jews were not entitled to full rights of citizenship, but in 1847, acknowledging his error, he took the other side. During the War of Secession, the sympathies of England's Chancellor of the Exchequer were with the South. Speaking at Newcastle on October 9, 1862, he said, "Jefferson Davis has undoubtedly founded a new nation." But 5 years passed, and he publicly confessed that he was wrong. Here is a man who, if he should err deeply, is yet so great that, like Cotton Mather, he might not hesitate to stand uncovered on the street corners and ask the forgiveness of mankind. Such men are saved by their enemies. Their own good and the good of humanity require that their balance of power shall not be too great. Had the North gone down, Gladstone might never have seen his mistake. In this instance, and in many others, he has not been the leader of progress, but its echo. Truth has been forced upon him. His passionate earnestness, his intense volition, his insensibility to moral perspective, his blindness to the sense of proportion might have led him into dangerous excess and frightful fanatical error, if it were not for the fact that such men create an opposition that is their salvation. To analyze a character so complex as Mr. Gladstone's requires the grasp of genius. We speak of the duality of the human mind, but here are half a dozen spirits in one. They rule in turn, and occasionally several of them struggle for the mastery. When the Fisk Jubilee singers visited England, we find Gladstone dropping the affairs of state to hear their music. He invited them to Hawarden, where he sang with them. So impressed was he with the Negro melodies that he anticipated that idea which has since been materialized: the founding of a national school of music that would seek to perfect in a scientific way these soul-stirring strains. He might have made a poet of no mean order, for his devotion to spiritual and physical beauty has made him a lifelong admirer of Homer and Dante. Those who have met him when the mood was upon him have heard him recite by the hour from the Iliad in the original. And yet the theology of Homer belongs to the realm of natural religion, with which Mr. Gladstone has little patience. A prominent member of the House of Commons once said, "The only two things that the Prime Minister really cares for are religion and finance." The statement comes near truth, for the chief element in Mr. Gladstone's character is his devotion to religion, and his signal successes have been in the line of economics. He believes in free trade as the gospel of social salvation. He revels in figures. He has price, value, consumption, distribution, import, export, fluctuation, all at his tongue's end, ready to hurl at anyone who ventures on a hasty generalization. And it is a significant fact that in his strong appeal for the disestablishment of the Irish Church, the stress of his argument was put on the point that the Irish Church was not in the line of the apostolic succession. Mr. Gladstone is grave, sober, earnest, proud, passionate, and at times romantic to a rare degree. He rebukes, refutes, contradicts, defies, and has a magnificent capacity for indignation. He will roar you like a lion, his eyes will flash, and his clenched fist will shake as he denounces that which he believes to be error. And yet among inferiors he will consult, defer, inquire, and show a humility, a forced suavity, that has given the caricaturist excuse. In his home he is gentle, amiable, always kind, social, and hospitable. He loves deeply, and his friends revere him to a point that is but little this side of idolatry, and surely their affection is not misplaced. Some day a Plutarch without a Plutarch's prejudice will arise, and with malice toward none, but with charity for all he will write the life of the statesman, Gladstone. Over against this he will write the life of an American statesman. The name he will choose will be that of one born in a log hut in the forest, who was rocked by the foot of a mother whose hands meanwhile were busy at her wheel, who had no schooling, no wise and influential friends, who had few books and little time to read, who knew no formal religion, who never travelled out of his own country, who had no help meet, but who walked solitary, alone, a man of sorrows, down whose homely furrowed face the tears of pity often ran, and yet whose name, strange paradox, stands in many minds as a symbol of mirth. And when the master comes, who has the power to portray with absolute fidelity the greatness of these two men? Will it be to the disadvantage of the American? The village of Hawarden is in Flintshire, North Wales. It is 7 miles from Chester. I walked the distance one fine June morning, out across the battlefield where Cromwell's army crushed that of Charles, and on past old stone walls and stately elms. There had been a shower the night before, but the morning sun came out bright and warm and made the raindrops glisten like beads as they clung to each leaf and flower. Larks sang and soared, and great flocks of crows called and cawed as they flew lazily across the sky. It was a time for silent peace and quiet joy and serene thankfulness for life and health. I walked leisurely and in a little over 2 hours reached Hawarden, a cluster of plain stone houses with climbing vines and flowers and gardens, which told of homely thrift and simple tastes. I went straight to the old stone church, which is always open, and rested for half an hour, listening to the organ on which a young girl was practicing, instructed by a white-haired old gentleman. The church is dingy and stained inside and out by time. The pews are irregular, some curiously carved, and all stiff and uncomfortable. I walked around and read the inscriptions on the walls, and all the time the young girl played and the old gentleman beat time, and neither noticed my presence. One brass tablet I saw was to a woman who for long years was a faithful servant at Hawarden Castle, erected in gratitude by W.E.G. Near this was a memorial to W.H. Gladstone, son of the Premier, who died in 1891. Then there were inscriptions to various Glynns and several others whose names appear in English history. I stood at the reading desk, where the great man has so often read, and marked the spot where William Ewart Gladstone and Catherine Glynn knelt when they were married here in July 1839. A short distance from the church is the entrance to Hawarden Park. This fine property was the inheritance of Mrs. Gladstone. The park itself seems to belong to the public. If Mr. Gladstone were a plain citizen, people, of course, would not come by hundreds and picnic on his preserve, but serving the state, he and his possessions belonged to the people, and this democratic familiarity is rather pleasing than otherwise. So great has been the throng in times past that an iron fence had to be placed about the ivy-covered ruins of the ancient castle to protect it from those who threatened to carry it away by the pocketful. A wall has also been put around the present castle, more properly house. This was done some years ago, I was told by the butler, after a torchlight procession of 1,000 enthusiastic admirers had come down from Liverpool and trampled Mrs. Gladstone's flowers into smithereens. The park contains many hundred acres and is as beautiful as an English park can be, and this is praise superlative. Flocks of sheep wander over the soft green turf, and beneath the spreading trees are sleek cows which seem used to visitors, and with big open eyes come up to be petted. Occasional signs are seen, "Please spare the trees." Some people suppose that this is an injunction which Mr. Gladstone himself has never observed. But when in his tree-cutting days, no monarch of the forest was ever felled without its case being fully tried by the entire household. Ruskin once, visiting at Hawarden, sat as judge, and after listening to the evidence gave sentence against several trees that were rotten at the core or overshadowing their betters. Then the Prime Minister shouldered his faithful Snickersney and went forth as executioner. I looked in vain for stumps, and on inquiry was told that they were all dug out, and the ground levelled, so no trace was left of the offender. The lady of the house at Hawarden is the second daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Gladstone. All accounts agree that she is a most capable and excellent woman. She is her father's home secretary and confidant, and in his absence takes full charge of the mail and looks after important business affairs. Her husband, the Reverend Harry Drew, is rector of Hawarden Church. I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Drew and found him very cordial and perfectly willing to talk about the great man who is grandfather to his baby. We also talked of America, and I soon surmised that Mr. Drew's ideas of the States were largely derived from a visit to the Wild West show. So I put the question to him direct. Did you see Buffalo Bill? Oh, yes. And did Mr. Gladstone go? Not only once, but 3 times, and he cheered as loudly as any boy. The Gladstone residence is a great rambling stone structure to which additions have been made from one generation to another. The towers and battlements are merely architectural appendiculi, but the effect of the whole, when viewed from a distance, rising out of its wealth of green and backed by the forest, is very imposing. I entered only the spacious front hallway and one room, the library. Bookshelves and books and more books were everywhere, several desks of different designs, one an American roll-top, as if the owner transacted business at one, translated Homer at another, and wrote social letters from a third. Then there were several large Japanese vases, a tiger skin, beautiful rugs, a few large paintings, and in a rack a full dozen axes and twice as many sticks. The whole place has an air of easy luxury that speaks of peace and plenty, of quiet and rest, of gentle thoughts and calm desires. As I walked across toward the village, the church bells slowly pealed the hour. Over the distant valley, night hovered. A streak of white mist, trailing like a thin veil, marked the passage of the murmuring brook. I thought of the grand old man over whose domain I was now treading, and my wonder was, not that one should live so long and still be vigorous, but that a man should live in such an idyllic spot, with love and books to keep him company, and yet grow old. J.M.W. Turner. I believe that these works of Turner's are at their first appearing as perfect as those of Phidias or Leonardo, that is to say, incapable of any improvement conceivable by human mind. John Ruskin, J.M.W. Turner. The beauty of the Upper Thames, with its fairy houseboats and green banks, has been sung by poets, but rash is the minstrel who tunes his lyre to sound the praises of this muddy stream in the vicinity of Chelsea. As yellow as the Tiber and thick as the Missouri after a flood, it comes twice a day, bearing upon its tossing tide a unique assortment of uncanny sights and sickening smells from the swarming city of men below. Chelsea was once a country village 6 miles from London Bridge. Now the far-reaching arms of the metropolis have taken it as her own. Chelsea may be likened to some rare spinster, grown old with years and good works, and now having a safe home with a rich and powerful benefactress. Yet Chelsea is not handsome in her old age, and Chelsea was not pretty in youth, nor fair to view in middle life. But Chelsea has been the foster mother of several of the rarest and fairest souls who have ever made the earth pilgrimage. And the greatness of genius still rests upon Chelsea. As we walk slowly through its winding ways, by the edge of its troubled waters, among dark and crooked turns, through curious courts, by old gateways and piles of steepled stone, where flocks of pigeons wheel and bells chime and organs peal and winds sigh, we know that all has been sanctified by their presence, and their spirits abide with us, and the splendid beauty of their visions is about us. For the stones beneath our feet have been hallowed by their tread, and the walls have borne their shadows. So all mean things are transfigured, and over all these plain and narrow streets their glory gleams. And it is the great men, and they alone, that can render a place sacred. Chelsea is now to the lovers of the beautiful a sacred name, a sacred soil, a place of pilgrimage where certain gods of art once lived and loved and worked and died. Sir Thomas More lived here and had for a frequent guest Erasmus. Hans Sloane began in Chelsea the collection of curiosities which has now developed into the British Museum Bishop Atterbury, who claimed that Dryden was a greater poet than Shakespeare. Dean Swift and Dr. Arbuthnot all lived in Church Street. Richard Steele just around the corner and Leigh Hunt in Chain Row. But it was from another name that the little street was to be immortalized. If France constantly has 40 immortals in the flesh, Surely it is a modest claim to say that Chelsea has three for all time: Thomas Carlyle, George Eliot, and Joseph Mallord William Turner. Turner's father was a barber. His youth was passed in poverty, and his advantages for education were very slight. And all this in the crowded city of London, where merit may knock long and still not be heard, and in a country where wealth and title count for much. When a boy, barefoot and ragged, he would wander away alone on the banks of the river and dream dreams about wonderful palaces and beautiful scenes, and then he would trace with a stick in the sands, endeavouring with mud, to make plain to the eye the things that his soul saw. His mother was quite sure that no good could come from this vagabondish nature, and she did not spare the rod, for she feared that the desire to scrawl and daub would spoil the child. But he was a stubborn lad with a pug nose and big, dreamy, wondering eyes and a heavy jaw. And when parents see that they have such a son, they had better hang up the rod behind the kitchen door and lay aside force and cease scolding. For love is better than a cat o' nine tails, and sympathy saves more souls than threats. The elder Turner considered that the proper use of a brush was to lather chins, but the boy thought differently, and once surreptitiously took one of his father's brushes to paint a picture. The brush, on being returned to its cup, was used the next day upon a worthy haberdasher, whose cheeks were shortly coloured a vermilion that matched his nose. This lost the barber a customer and secured the boy a thrashing. Young Turner did not always wash his father's shop windows well, nor sweep off the sidewalk properly. Like all boys, he would rather work for someone else than for his folks. He used to run errands for an engraver by the name of Smith, John Raphael Smith. Once, when Smith sent the barber's boy with a letter to a certain art gallery with orders to get the answer and hurry back, mind you, the boy forgot to get the answer and to hurry back. Then another boy was dispatched after the first, and boy number 2 found boy number 1 sitting with staring eyes and open mouth in the art gallery before a painting of Claude Lorraine's. When boy number 1 was at last forcibly dragged away and reached the shop of his master, he got his ears well cuffed for his forgetfulness. But from that day forth he was not the same being that he had been before his eyes fell on that Claude Lorraine. He was transformed, as much so as was Lazarus after he was called from beyond the portals of death and had come back to earth, bearing in his heart the secrets of the grave. From that time Turner thought of Claude Lorraine during the day and dreamed of him at night, and he stole his way into every exhibition where a Claude was to be seen. And now I wish that Claude Lorraine was the subject of this sketch as well as Turner, for his life is a picture full of sweetest poetry, framed in a world of dullest prose. The eyes of this boy, whom they had thought dreamy, dull, and listless, now shone with a different light. He thirsted to achieve, to do, to become, yes, to become a greater painter than Claude Lorraine. His employer saw the change and smiled at it, but he allowed the lad to put in backgrounds and add the skies to cheap prints, just because the youngster teased to do it. Then one day a certain patron of the shop came and looked over the shoulder of the Turner boy, and he said, "He has skill, perhaps talent, and I think the recording angel should give this man a separate page in the book of remembrance and write his name in illuminated colours, for he gave young Turner access to his own collection and to his library, and he never cuffed him, nor kicked him, nor called him dunce, whereat the boy was much surprised. But he encouraged the youth to sketch a picture in watercolours, and then he bought the picture and paid him 10 shillings for it, and the name of this man was Dr. Munro. The next year, when young Turner was 14, Dr. Munro had him admitted to the Royal Academy as a student, and in 1790 he exhibited a watercolour of the Archbishop's Palace at Lambeth. The picture took no prize, and doubtless was not worthy of one, but from now on Joseph M.W. Turner was an artist, and other hands had to sweep the barber shop. But he sold few pictures. They were not popular. Other artists scorned him, possibly intuitively fearing him, for mediocrity always fears when the ghost of genius does not down at its bidding. Then Turner was accounted unsociable. Besides, he was ragged, uncouth, independent, and did not conform to the ways of society. So the select circle cast him out, more properly speaking, did not let him in. Still he worked on and exhibited at every Academy exhibition, yet he was often hungry, and the London fog crept cold and damp through his threadbare clothes. But he toiled on, for Claude Lorraine was ever before him. In 1802, when 27 years of age, he visited France and made a tour through Switzerland, tramping over many long miles with his painting kit on his back, and he brought back rich treasures in way of sketches and quickened imagination. In the years following, he took many such trips, and came to know Venice, Rome, Florence, and Paris as perfectly as his own London. When 33 years of age, he was still worshipping at the shrine of Claude Lorraine. His pictures painted at this time are evidence of his ideal, and his book, Liber Studiorum, issued in 1808, is modelled after the Liber Veritatis. But the book surpasses Claude's, and Turner knew it, and this may have led him to burst his shackles and cast loose from his idol. For in 1815, we find him working according to his own ideas, showing an originality and audacity in conception and execution that made him the butt of the critics and caused consternation to rage through the studios of competitors. Gradually it dawned upon a few scattered collectors that things so strongly condemned must have merit, for why should the pack bay so loudly if there were no quarry? So to have a Turner was at least something for your friends to discuss. Then carriages began to stop before the dingy building at 47 Queen Anne Street, and broadcloth and satin mounted the creaking stairs to the studio. It happened about this time that Turner's prices began to increase like the Sibyl of old. If a customer said, "I do not want it," the painter put an extra £10 on the price. For Dido building Carthage, Turner's original price was £500. People came to see the picture, and they said, "The price is too high." Next day, Turner's price for the Carthage was £1,000. Finally, Sir Robert Peel offered the painter £5,000 for the picture, but Turner said he had decided to keep it for himself, and he did. In the forepart of his career, he sold few pictures, for the simple reason that no one wanted them. And he sold few pictures during the latter years of his life, for the reason that his prices were so high that none but the very rich could buy first. The public scorned Turner. Next, Turner scorned the public. In the beginning it would not buy his pictures, and later it could not. A frivolous public and a shallow press from his first exhibition, when 15 years of age, to his last, when 70, made sport of his originalities. But for merit, there is a recompense in sneers, and a benefit in sarcasms, and a compensation in hate. For when these things get too pronounced, a champion appears, and so it was with Turner. Next to having a Boswell write one's life, what is better than a Ruskin to uphold one's cause? Success came slowly. His wants were few, but his ambition never slackened. And finally, the dreams of his youth became the realities of his manhood. At 20, Turner loved a beautiful girl. They became engaged. He went away on a tramp sketching tour and wrote his lady love just one short letter each month. He believed that absence only makes the heart grow fonder, not knowing that this statement is only the vagary of a poet. When he returned, the lady was betrothed to another. He gave the pair his blessing and remained a bachelor, a very confirmed bachelor. Perhaps, however, the reason his fiancée proved untrue was not through lack of the epistles he wrote her, but on account of them. In the British Museum, I examined several letters written by Turner. They appeared very much like copy for a Josh Billings almanac. Such originality in spelling, punctuation, and use of capitals. It was admirable in its uniqueness. Turner did not think in words. He could only think in paint. But the young lady did not know this. And when a letter came from her homely little lover, she was shocked. Then she laughed. Then she showed these letters to a nice young man who was clerk to a fishmonger, and he laughed. Then they both laughed. Then this nice young man and this beautiful young lady became engaged, and they were married at St. Andrew's on a lovely May morning. And they lived happily ever afterward. Turner was small and in appearance plain. Yet he was big enough to paint a big picture, and he was not so homely as to frighten away all beautiful women. But Philip Gilbert Hamerton tells us, "Fortunate in many things, Turner was lamentably unfortunate in this, that throughout his whole life, he never came under the ennobling and refining influence of a good woman. Like Plato, Michelangelo, Sir Isaac Newton, and his own Claude Lorraine, he was wedded to his art. But at 65, his genius suddenly burst forth afresh. And his work, Mr. Ruskin says, at that time exceeded in daring brilliancy and in the rich flowering of imagination anything that he had previously done. Mr. Ruskin could give no reason, but rumor says, a woman. The one weakness of our hero that hung to him for life was the idea that he could write poetry. The tragedian always thinks he can succeed in comedy. The comedian spends hours in his garret rehearsing tragedy. Most preachers have an idea that they could have made a quick fortune in business, and many businessmen are very sure that if they had taken to the pulpit, there would now be fewer empty pews. So the greatest landscape painter of recent times imagined himself a poet. Hamerton says that for remarkable specimens of grammar, spelling, and construction, Turner's verse would serve well to be given to little boys to correct. One spot in Turner's life over which I like to linger is his friendship with Sir Walter Scott. They collaborated in the production of Provincial Antiquities and spent many happy hours together tramping over Scottish moors and mountains. Sir Walter lived out his days in happy ignorance concerning the art of painting, and although he liked the society of Turner, he confessed that it was quite beyond his ken why people bought his pictures. "And as for your books," said Turner, "the covers of some are certainly very pretty." Yet these men took a satisfaction in each other's society, such as brothers might enjoy, but without either man appreciating the greatness of the other. Turner's temperament was audacious, self-centered, self-reliant, eager for success and fame, yet at the same time scorning public opinion, a paradox often found in the artistic mind of the first class. Silent always, with a bitter silence, disdaining to tell his meaning when the critics could not perceive it. He was above all things always the artist, never the realist. The realist pictures the things he sees. The artist expresses that which he feels. Children, and all simple folk who use pen, pencil, or brush, describe the things they behold. As intellect develops and goes more in partnership with hand, imagination soars, and things are outlined that no man can see except he be able to perceive the invisible. To appreciate a work of art, you must feel as the artist felt. Now, it is very plain that the vast majority of people are not capable of this high sense of sublimity which the creative artist feels, and therefore they do not understand, and not understanding, they wax merry or cynical or sarcastic or wrathful or envious, or they pass by unmoved. And I maintain that those who pass by unmoved are more righteous than they who scoff. If I should attempt to explain to my little girl the awe I feel when I contemplate the miracle of maternity, she would probably change the subject by prattling to me about a kitten she saw lapping milk from a blue saucer. If I should attempt to explain to some men what I feel when I contemplate the miracle of maternity, they would smile and turn it all into an unspeakable jest. Is not the child nearer to God than the man? We thus see why to many Browning is only a joke, Whitman an eccentric, Dante insane, and Turner a pretender. These have all sought to express things which the many cannot feel, and consequently they have been and are the butt of jokes and jibes innumerable, except ye become as little children, etc., and yet the scoffers are often people of worth. Nothing so shows the limitation of humanity as this. Genius often does not appreciate genius. The inspired, strangely enough, are like the fools. They do not recognize inspiration. An Englishman called on Voltaire and found him in bed reading Shakespeare. "What are you reading?" asked the visitor. "Your Shakespeare," said the philosopher, and as he answered, he flung the book across the room. "He's not my Shakespeare," said the Englishman. Greene, Rymer, Dryden, Warburton, and Dr. Johnson used collectively or individually the following expressions in describing the work of the author of Hamlet: conceit, overreach, wordplay, extravagance, overdone, absurdity, obscurity, puerility, bombast, idiocy, untruth, improbability, drivel. Byron wrote from Florence to Murray, I know nothing of painting, and I abhor and spit upon all saints and so-called spiritual subjects that I see portrayed in these churches. But the past is so crowded with vituperation that it is difficult to select. Besides that, we do not wish to. But let us take a sample of arrogance from yesterday to prove our point, and then drop the theme for something pleasanter. Pew and pulpit have fallen over each other for the privilege of hitting Darwin. A bishop warns his congregation that Emerson is dangerous. Spurgeon calls Shelley a sensualist. Dr. Buckley speaks of Susan B. Anthony as the leader of the short-haired. Talmage cracks jokes about evolution, referring feelingly to monkey ancestry. And a prominent divine of England writes the world's Congress of Religions down as pious waxworks. These things being true, and all the sentiments quoted coming from good but blindly zealous men, is it a wonder that the artist is not understood? A brilliant picture called Cologne Evening attracted much attention at the Academy exhibition of 1826. One day, the people who so often collected around Turner's work were shocked to see that the beautiful canvas had lost its brilliancy and evidently had been tampered with by some miscreant. A friend ran to inform Turner of the bad news. Don't say anything. I only smirched it with lampblack. It was spoiling the effect of Lawrence's picture that hung next to it. The black will all wash off after the exhibition, and his tender treatment of his aged father shows the gentle side of his nature. The old barber, whose trembling hand could no longer hold a razor, wished to remain under his son's roof in guise of a servant. But the son said, No, we fought the world together, and now that it seeks to do me honor, you shall share all the benefits. And Turner never smiled when the little, wizened old man would whisper to some visitor, Yes, yes, Joseph is the greatest artist in England, and I am his father. Turner had a way of sending £10 notes in blank envelopes to artists in distress, and he did this so frequently that the news got out finally, but never through Turner's telling, and then he had to adopt other methods of doing good by stealth. I do not contend that Turner's character was immaculate, but still it is very probable that worldlings do not appreciate what a small part of this great genius touched the mire. To prove the sordidness of the man, one critic tells, with visage awfully solemn, how Turner once gave an engraving to a friend and then, after a year, sent demanding it back. But to a person with a groat's worth of wit, the matter is plain. The dreamy, abstracted artist, who bumped into his next-door neighbors on the street and never knew them, forgot he had given the picture and believed he had only loaned it. This is made still more apparent by the fact that, when he sent for the engraving in question, he administered a rebuke to the man for keeping it so long. The poor dullard who received the note flew into a rage, returned the picture, sent his compliments, and begged the great artist to take your picture and go to the devil. Then certain scribblers, who through mental disease had lost the capacity for mirth, dipped their pen in aqua fortis and wrote of the innate meanness, the malice prepense, and the old Adam which dwelt in the heart of Turner. No one laughed except a few Irishmen and an American or two who chanced to hear of the story. Of Turner's many pictures, I will mention in detail but two, both of which are to be seen on the walls of the National Gallery. First, the old Temeraire. This warship had been sold out of service and was being towed away to be broken up. The scene was photographed on Turner's brain, and he immortalized it on canvas. We cannot do better than borrow the words of Mr. Ruskin. Of all pictures not visibly involving human pain, this is the most pathetic ever painted. The utmost pensiveness which can ordinarily be given to a landscape depends on adjuncts of ruin, but no ruin was ever so affecting as the gliding of this ship to her grave. This particular ship, crowned in the Trafalgar hour of trial with chief victory, surely if ever anything without a soul deserved honor or affection, we owe them here. Surely some sacred care might have been left in our thoughts for her, some quiet space amid the lapse of English waters. Nay, not so. We have stern keepers to trust her glory to, the fire and the worm. Nevermore shall sunset lay golden robe upon her, nor starlight tremble on the waves that part at her gliding. Perhaps where the low gate opens to some cottage garden, the tired traveller may ask idly why the moss grows so green on the rugged wood. And even the sailor's child may not know that the night dew lies deep in the warrants of the old Temeraire. The burial of Sir David Wilkie at sea has brought tears to many eyes, yet there is no burial. The ship is far away in the gloom of the offing. You cannot distinguish a single figure on her decks, but you behold her great sails standing out against the leaden blackness of the night, and you feel that out there a certain scene is being enacted, and if you listen closely, you can hear the solemn voice of the captain as he reads the burial service. Then there is a pause, a swift sliding sound, a splash, and all is over. Turner left to the British nation by his will 19,000 pencil and watercolor sketches and 100 large canvases. These pictures are now to be seen in the National Gallery in rooms set apart and sacred to Turner's work. For fear it may be thought that the number of sketches mentioned above is a misprint, let us say that if he had produced one picture a day for 50 years, it would not equal the number of pieces bestowed by his will on the nation. This, of course, takes no account of the pictures sold during his lifetime, and as he left a fortune of £144,000, $720,000, we may infer that not all his pictures were given away. At Chelsea, I stood in the little room where he breathed his last, that bleak day in 1851. The unlettered but motherly old woman who took care of him in those last days never guessed his greatness. None in the house or the neighborhood knew. To them, he was only Mr. Booth, an eccentric old man of moderate means, who liked to muse, read, and play with children. He had no callers, no friends. He went to the city every day and came back at night. He talked but little. He was absent-minded. He smoked and thought and smiled and muttered to himself. He never went to church, but once one of the lodgers asked him what he thought of God. God, God! What do I know of God? What does anyone? He is our life. He is the all. But we need not fear him. All we can do is to speak the truth and do our work. Tomorrow we go. Where? I know not, but I am not afraid. Of art to these strangers he would never speak. Once they urged him to go with them to an exhibition at Kensington, but he smiled feebly as he lit his pipe and said, "An art exhibition? No, no. A man can show on a canvas so little of what he feels, it is not worth the while." At last he died, passed peacefully away, and his attorney came and took charge of his remains. Many are the hard words that have been flung off by heedless tongues about Turner's taking an assumed name and living in obscurity. But what you call fault, I call accent. Surely if a great man and world-famous desires to escape the flatterers and the silken mesh of so-called society and live the life of simplicity, he has a right to do so. Again, Turner was a very rich man in his old age. He did much for struggling artists and assisted aspiring merit in many ways. So it came about that his mail was burdened with begging letters, and his life made miserable by appeals from impecunious persons, good and bad, and from churches, societies, and associations without number. He decided to flee them all, and he did. The Carthage already mentioned is one of his finest works, and he esteemed it so highly that he requested that when death came, his body should be buried, wrapped in its magnificent folds. But the wish was disregarded. His remains rest in the crypt of St. Paul's, beside the dust of Reynolds. His statue in marble adorns a niche in the great cathedral, and his name is secure high on the roll of honor. And if for no other reason, the name and fame of Chelsea should be deathless as the home of Turner.